Include Aditi Maheshwari Goyal, who I'll just call in a bit, Alin Maheshwari, Arpita Das, Claudia Kaiser, Kanan Sundaram, Maggie Doyle, Philippa McGuinness, PrashastiRastogi, and Urvashi Butalia. And the session will be moderated by Naveen Kishore.
Yes!
The head,
He just wants
between the both of you, anyway, the heads of the round table will be Naveen Kishore, Urvashi Butalia, and Kanan Sundaram. To give a flow to this session, we'll begin with Safir Anand, who will give us an Indian perspective on copyright, and we'll introduce Michael Healy, and then we have Michael Healy with his presentation. So, over to you, Safir.
Hi, good afternoon to all of you. I just thought I'll make life easier for you. I'm a lawyer, so I will try to make life easy by not speaking in legal language and trying and speaking in more simple language. I carried a small souvenir for you today, which is a comic series that we came out with. If you give that comic to a kid to read in a matter of I think 6 or 7 pages, he gets to know what is the copyright law in India. I will ask my colleagues to distribute it later to you during the session. It also talks about other IP laws because we are an IP firm, but you can know trademarks and designs and other things and read about copyright. So I just thought I'd share a quick perspective about rundown of the important cases in India on the copyright regime and how they could impact most of the publication houses and most of the people associated with it. As you may be aware, there is no concept of copyright per se an idea. Most of the battles that are lost in courts are where ideas are being sought to be protected rather than the expression of ideas. So the first proposition that comes up for testing in courts is to what extent have you developed an idea and to what extent have you expressed the idea in the form of any medium. So just to give you examples, I picked up 3 random cases. The first is the case where somebody came up with one of the publication houses came up with a concept of a character called Nagesh and Nagaraj. Nagaraj, basically, the word Nag means snake in India. So he thought of a character that looked like was green in color. He had scales on his body, and he would emit poison the moment he had to take revenge against somebody. And the character was called Nagaraj. Somebody launched another character called Nagesh. So from a trademark perspective, it's not similar, but from a copyright perspective, the other character also had a similar look. He also did activities which were quite similar in terms of his behavior. And therefore, when the matter went into court, it was held to be a violation of copyright because it said that this was not just an idea, but an expression of an idea that had been taken to the next level. In contrast to this, there is a leading case in the United States that is called Star Wars versus Battlestar, in which there was a trademark issue that got settled in court because one of the characters involved was quite similar to name. But in terms of the concept or the idea, the matter did not result in any judicial pronouncement. The simple reason was that the battle was, for those of you who are Star Wars fans, you will know that it has a robo. And the robo is a friendly robo, so the theme that was invoked was that you cannot copy the idea of a friendly robo, and it was shown that this idea had already existed, and it was not something that was expressed in a way that was infringed upon. And the third was the case where I think Sanjoy had also got involved as one of the earlier times when we were briefed, where we had invoked rights to stop a television serial that was being made on the theme of marriage. So the concept was that there was a narrative and somebody said that brides would come and pick their prospective grooms and there would be a certain way in which the entire program would be carried out, and Sony decided to launch a television serial with Madhuri Dixit based upon their theme, and we went to court and we got a restraint against that. The other element that is important for you is to know that in order to invoke copyright, you have to be original, but there is no yardstick defined of what is the extent of originality that you need. So the standards of what is creative and what is original vary from country to country. For example, the United States, where the copyright law of the United States and the copyright law of India is substantially similar. There's not much of deviation in respect of the nature of the laws. But in US, in order to invoke rights, you just need a minimum threshold limit to say that it's original, and they don't really go into the extent of creativity. In certain countries like France and Spain and some of the civil law countries, it's necessary that the author must leave an impression upon the work. So it's like if you have a certain trait of writing or a certain style of writing, it should come out from your work in order to constitute a level of creativity. The third point I wanted to indicate is that there are certain work where you may have a lot of effort, but there is lesser amount of skill involved, and those have not been held to be protectable under law. For example, the compilation of telephone numbers in a telephone directory is held not to be subject matter of copyright. So lots of directories fail for this reason. Similarly, question papers in an exam, or if you write a book on question papers that may be asked in an exam, the chances that that will be treated as copyright are minimal. Also bare acts and commentaries on bare acts, etc. Then there is this very interesting thing which US developed and India follows, which is the kinds of liabilities that can be imposed upon potential infringers. So there are three kinds of potential infringers for copyright. The first is a direct infringer. A direct infringer is somebody who's involved in doing wrong and you can directly attribute it to him. So in all likelihood, it's a plaintiff and defendant one-to-one battle. Defendant is the person who comes to court in order to defend the matter against the plaintiff. The second is a contributory person. So what happens in contributory is like, for example, let me assume that I run a website and I allow infringing activities to happen on that website, and you give me what is called as a takedown notice, and I do not contribute, I do not take the product out, whereas I know that there is a wrong that is being commissioned, and I do have the means to take it out. I mean, if, for example, if technology does not enable me to take it out, then it becomes difficult. It happens a lot in films. Like if you go to court and you want to injunct a particular scene in a film that violates copyright, and there is no technology, for example, to edit that film, then you could be in a problem. But in most cases, technologies are available. You can blur things, you can take them out. So the US has a Digital Millennium Act, and India follows by the same policy of a takedown notice. And the third is a vicarious liability, where, for example, there is a wrong that is happening, and that wrong has a financial benefit for you, so you allow it to happen. I mean, just to give you an example, say Google runs, say let's assume that there's a violation that happens on Google, and Google says, but this is coming up in a search engine, my main business is to provide you a search, I'm not charging for AdWords here, I'm not pushing it up, and it's not something that I'm really participating in. As opposed to a situation where the event it has so much of financial value because it's controversial or because it's a very hot launch of a book that is happening, and that there is a financial benefit, for example, higher subscription based to Google, as a result of which they allow that particular activity to come, in which case there is an element of vicarious liability. I'll just quickly touch on 2-3 points because I think I'll run the presentation to Michael and his abilities to share better things with you. Then there's a very interesting element that comes in, which is an element to do with jurisdiction. So, and this is also the battle between open source code and copyright matter. So let's assume that I am a publisher of, say, medical books, and there is somebody who offers those books free of service to students all over the world through a portal. In all probability, the matter would be, if a copyright claim was filed, there would be an injunctive relief against that person. It would not be a defense to come and say, because there is a commercial angle involved in his abilities to provide that to a student. So in US, a particular case happened, which is called Elsevier versus Ski Hub, where $15 million of damages was awarded against this particular person who was copying medical books and offering them at a particular site. The only difficulty, and that's another point, is jurisdiction. So the only difficulty was that despite the award of damages, nothing could be collected because neither were the servers located in US and neither did that person have any asset in US. So if there's a violation of a court order, let me assume that somebody in India comes out with a book and somebody is violating, and we go to court and we get an injunctive order, but the defendant is not located in the country, then there's no contempt of court, because for contempt of court there will be attachment of properties, or there will be some consequences, and somebody could be sitting outside. So the only thing that can happen then is that you can use technology to bar the distribution of that product within the country, which is very easy because search engines can sort of block things away. Then there's a very interesting angle that has started developing when people make edits to work, and for example, Disney makes movies. So a particular company in US called VidAngels decided to make amendments to those films in order to format them for your homes. So let's assume there are objectionable scenes of violence or scenes relating to sex or something which were edited. So Disney sued, and VidAngels claimed that they had, there was no violation of copyright because they had exercised skill and judgment in making amendments. But it was held that this was a violation because under law there is concept of editing a work, as long as it does not change the entire character of the work, will constitute a violation. This is also the provision as far as India is concerned. So if in India, let's assume somebody takes a work and he says that I've only made edits to the work to make it more user friendly, I made it more child friendly, I've converted the illustrations, then it does not constitute a new work. It's still a violation, because the rights to transform a work, the rights to translate a work, the rights to do a transformation of the work, or an adaptation of the work, or a conversion of the work from a book to a film, book to drama, etc., all vest with the original creator of the work. That's one of the reasons why certain movies, and Chetan Bhagat had a controversy with this movie called Three Idiots, where he gave rights to make the film, but he said that you made modifications to the film which are not conducive. Right now, there's a matter sub judice in court where Puri is in controversy because there's a gentleman who claims that he's written a book and that the movie is based upon the book, but no credit has been given. So India also recognizes what is called as paternal rights and moral rights. Moral rights means that once a work is created, I don't have the right to distort the work. I cannot make changes to the work. I can't take a book and buy rights to it and do another version of the book and I change the story and the author's rights to express the something in the way that he likes to express is distorted. Just as you can't buy a painting and say I'll change the name of I'll just add another horse to it and now it's no longer a Hussein and it's your contributor to the work. And on the last summary note, on a more comic finding, there's a case that was filed in US where they tried to invoke rights on whether copyright is only for humans or does it also apply to monkeys. Because in a particular example, a monkey took his own selfie. And it's called the monkey selfie case, and somebody tried, and there was a violation, so PETA got involved and they decided to, PETA got involved and decided to sue, saying that there's a violation of the rights of the monkey, but the court says that the provisions of Copyright Act are limited to humans as of now. And so with that, I will introduce you to Michael, and I'll give you a very short introduction of him. Michael is the Executive Director and International Relations at the Copyright Clearance Center. He's also a board member of the Copyright Hub Foundation in United Kingdom and the chairperson of the board and the International Standards and Name Identifier. And there's much of introduction for him, but I probably will not do justice if I keep describing. I'll let his intellect talk here.
The transition from a story about a monkey to me is the least flattering introduction I've ever had. Thank you, Sophia. You must look at his comic book, by the way. It's based around a character called Mr. IP. I always think of myself as Mr. IP, so I'm going to sue him for infringement of my rights immediately after the seminar. It's nice to be here, thank you. I was asked to do some slides just to set up a conversation with my fellow panelists, so I did prepare them. I thought we were going to project them, but anybody who wants a copy of these, of course, can ask me, or we'll circulate them after the event. So very, very happy to make these available. The point I want to say, yeah. So
that's the peaceful training. You can feed it to the slide from any angle.
So what I'm going to do is try to move my own slides forward on my own laptop and these ones at the same time, but I'm sure you can help.
Have you sought the permission of the other laptop?
Yes. So as I think everybody is aware, yeah, you move it forward for me. Copyright is an 18th century phenomenon. It started in my hometown in London, and over the following 3 centuries or so, it's evolved to encompass a lot of international treaties and conventions, etc. But the important thing to notice about copyright is, like all legislation, it's a reflection of the society it's attempting to control. But the difficulty is it's always several years behind the commercial and technological realities that it is trying to reflect. And one of the principal things I'd like you to keep in mind is that copyright law in most countries, particularly the United States where I live and work these days, is based on certain assumptions about ownership that are disappearing. So the last Copyright Act we had in the United States of any significance was 1976, the year Apple was founded. And if you think of the technological transformation that has happened in the successive 40 years, you realize what a difficult time copyright legislation has in keeping track with the realities that we work with every single day. And yes, please. And just think about patterns of consumption, how they've changed. We don't own anything with music anymore. We license. We're not owners, we're licensees. And I wonder if the implications of that transformation in our behavior has been understood by legislators. And again, referring to the United States, which is the place I know most about, legislation simply hasn't kept pace with the realities of ownership, licensing, etc. And the distinctions that are increasingly blurred between content owners, content licensees, content creators. There's this terrific mismatch. And so what's happened in the United States is that because there's been a legislative vacuum, all the action has moved to the courtrooms into the United States. And it's all about litigation rather than legislation right now in the US. And I think that's true in so many jurisdictions around the world, possibly true here in India, which makes Safir a wealthy man, all this litigation that he gets to pursue. But seriously, lawyers have really stepped forward, and the main battleground isn't inside parliaments and legislatures, it's now in courtrooms. So if we can move forward one more. Now the biggest transformation in my lifetime since the 1976 Copyright Act in the United States has been the emergence of so many platforms for sharing content. Whether you look at social networks or file sharing platforms or whatever, social media is really sharing media. And if you look at the extraordinary numbers, 2.2 billion active Facebook users, 900 million WeChat users in China every single day. These are phenomenal numbers which are essentially using social media as a platform for sharing content. It might be photographs of you on your vacation or on the beach or your wedding, or it might be that article you saw in the newspaper yesterday, or that piece of video content which is copyright protected. So we have this transformation of our society. And of course, global platforms have begun to dominate. We all talk about the GAFA phenomenon, you know, Amazon, Google, Facebook, Apple, etc. And at least in Europe and the United States, there's tremendous tension between these platforms and legislators on the one hand and other content creators. Who, for example, is responsible for monitoring copyright infringement on YouTube? Is it Google? They certainly would prefer it not to be. And the big fight in the European Union at the moment is, you know, around that issue of who's monitoring infringement, who's responsible for taking down infringing content, who's responsible for rewarding copyright owners appropriately, and so on. So there's this tremendous debate happening in Europe and the United States around these dominant global platforms, and a tremendous sense of resentment building about the value imbalance that underpins these global platforms. You know, the tremendous revenue streams that are flowing into these big companies, are they really adequately rewarding content creators who are the lifeblood of many of these platforms? So that's another area of real interest and concern. Just in case you think it's about film and music and novels and poetry, etc., it's not. The battleground is also in the academic sphere. We're all familiar, I imagine, in this room with the Delhi University judgment and the apparent license it gives to do wholesale infringement of academic texts on the campus. So the battleground is, yes, entertainment, but also academic content. And we are seeing systematic global infringement of academic authors' works, of academic publishers' works, and I have to say, I think we might be losing the battle in so many places, not least here in India, but in other places too. Canada is a battleground between librarians and authors and publishers on the one hand. Australia is increasingly a battleground, it seems. South Africa is following the Canadian model, and we're seeing massive license to infringe, I would say. So there's a tremendous amount of work going on, which is antithetical to the interests, I think, of content creators. Just see if we can move forward. So my principal message for you is that most of the legislation that governs behavior in this area is obsolete. How can it be anything else when it's 40 to 50 years behind commercial realities in the United States? We have laws based on notions of products which have nothing to do with the realities, which are based on services. They're based on notions of ownership that have disappeared, and increasingly consumers' rights are dependent not on legislation, but on the license agreements we sign, but most often never read. How many of you buy things every single day? Have you ever wondered why they give you a flashlight on your phone? Go and read the service conditions behind the flashlight and see what they can do with your data. Do you really need the flashlight that badly? Probably you wouldn't get the flashlight for free if you knew what you were giving away. But that's a story for another day. We're increasingly dependent, I know, on a small number of very powerful global platforms whose interests are not completely aligned with those of authors and publishers. Let me put it as diplomatically as I can. So let's move forward one more slide. So we're living in a world where copyright is front page news. When I first went into publishing, the only people who cared about copyright were very old lawyers and very old academics. I never met anybody with a commercial interest in copyright, except now it's front page news. Everybody is talking about intellectual property, about copyright, because we live apparently in this creative economy where so much of economic success, vibrancy, and health depends on industries that are based on intellectual property. Not just the movie industry, not just Bollywood, not just publishing. Pharmaceuticals are an intellectual property intensive business. The reason I sell so many copyright licenses to Glaxo and AstraZeneca and Dr. Reddy here in India is not because they care about copyright, because you can't expect people not to infringe your drug patents if you are ripping off Elsevier and Springer and copying their literature without permission. So IP-intensive businesses are everywhere, and they're an increasingly powerful part of the global economy. And so there's this massive debate going on about the future of copyright, and when people start debating things, politicians wake up, they take notice, and copyright has become a highly politicized topic. And we're seeing growing government intervention. So if we can just move forward one more slide. So the question is copyright fit for the modern world? Do we have the appropriate licensing mechanisms? Have we failed the marketplace by failing to put in easy licensing platforms? As Dr. Gurry, the head of WIPO, said, we need to make it as easy to license as it is to infringe. And we have failed in that challenge, it seems to me. It's very easy to infringe copyright. It's not so easy, if you want to do the right thing, to find the licensing platform you need. And how do we balance the rights and responsibilities of users? I'm really tired of content users telling me about their rights. You also have responsibilities when you buy content. And I think we're losing, in some respects, ground on the debate in this respect. So let's move forward one more. So if you're a creator of content, if you're a publisher of content, you're in a crisis. It's the worst of all possible worlds right now. Technology enables proliferation very easily. That facilitates infringement. There's a public debate about what we contribute to society as publishers, and I think we're losing that debate. And we need to be so much more effective in our advocacy of publishers, our advocacy of writers, and explain what it is we contribute to the creative economy. We're seeing, as I mentioned earlier, this dominance of a small number of highly global platforms whose respect for intellectual property at best is minimal, and we need to be a lot better at putting in place market services that make licenses of content much easier and has much less friction than it does today. So moving forward, I'm going to run through this really quickly. Every country you can think of is reviewing its intellectual property laws right now. Japan, the UK, Australia, the European Union. Let's move on. We've seen new legislation in Japan, terrible new legislation back in 2012 in Canada, which has decimated the licensing revenues going to authors and publishers. This Canadian flu is infecting so many parts of the world. If you want to see what that flu looks like, look at the legislation that's coming in South Africa later this year, which will kill the licensing revenue for authors and publishers from the academic environment. We're seeing it in China, we're seeing it in the European Union. I'm very concerned that we're losing this battle as content creators, and we really need to raise our game to articulate what it is we really contribute in this area. So, again, moving forward, a lot of litigation. Delhi University, I mentioned earlier, Georgia State University in the USA, which is going back and forth, and is unresolved. Lots of high-profile legislation in the copyright field in the European Union as well. Let's move forward. So, in summary, technology is transforming everything. IP, copyright is changing, and we're struggling right now to find balance in this new era. So what do we need to do? Let's move forward one more. We need to remind ourselves what it is we're up against, the scale of the challenge facing us. Every CEO of every publishing company needs to engage with the copyright debate. If they fail, their businesses are seriously at risk. We need to advocate so much more effectively publicly about the value we bring as publishers, the contribution we make as authors to society and to the creative economy. As an industry, as I said before, more and better mechanisms in the marketplace are necessary to make it easier to license content. Many, many people, young and old, want to do the right thing. They want to get permission. They want to pay for the content they're using and reusing. Man, we make it so hard for them to do that in our industry. And for teachers, for students, for in-house corporate employees, everybody, we need to make point-of-content licensing solutions available, accessible, usable, affordable, and we're not really even at the beginning of that challenge. And we need to be better at enforcing our rights too. So there's Dr. Gary's remark. We need a global infrastructure that permits simple global licensing. In other words, make it as easy to license as it is to infringe. That's the challenge we face. Because we all know infringing is really easy. And that's it. That's all I have to say. And I probably took too long. So happy to take questions, but really keen to hand over now to fellow panelists who have much more interesting and exciting things to say than me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael, for that frighteningly lucid presentation. Before we take questions, I just wanted to set the, I'm the sort of custodian to the term moderator for the duration of this, with my fellow moderators here, Kanan and Urvashi. What I thought we could do, if everybody agrees, is take 3 questions to begin with, each of you, And after which, I know that some people wrote in with specific presentations of case histories, like a few those, and then gave a few minutes to each. Yeah, is that sort of okay? All right? Okay. Questions? First for you, and then. Or do it the other way around. Yeah, do it the other way around.
Yeah, my question would be, how can we manage to bring this topic into the public debate? Are you working on ideas on that? I mean, because, as you said, copyright still has this notion of, you know, people talk about copyright very technical and things like that. So it has to be, from what I understand, we are in a really difficult situation and we need to act. And apart from, and we need to make it easier to license, but we also need the people or the politicians or the intellectuals to understand what it is really about. And therefore we need to create stories, don't we?
We do, and we're good at creating stories, aren't we? If we're not, we're out of business. But
Obviously not good enough.
obviously not good enough. So there are three conversations, aren't there? There's the conversations we have with ourselves as an industry. And I think we're getting much more effective at raising awareness at C-suite level and below, because if publishing isn't in the licensing business, I'm not sure what business we think we're in, unless we're selling physical content to people. But really, we're not anymore. As someone smarter than me said, every single transaction on the internet, and we're all making transactions every day, every single transaction is a licensing transaction, but we don't realize it. So we have to have a conversation with ourselves, and we're getting better at that. I think awareness of copyright amongst executives in publishing is getting better and better and better everywhere I go. Trade associations like the International Publishers Association, they're playing a really important part here. National associations, UK, US, I think awareness is getting better. The second conversation is conversations with government and politicians. And again, I think we're getting better at that too. So it's not all doom and gloom. I think publishers are getting better and better at making a case for the distinctive value they bring in the supply chain and in the value chain and the creative economy as a whole. But we're better at it at some places than we are at others. I think Australia did a fantastic job mobilizing its creators against the Productivity Commission. That battle hasn't been won, it's going to come back, I suspect, but if you want to look at a textbook example of how you mobilize opinion to support the industry, Australia is as good a place as any. They didn't do that in Canada, and they're living with the consequences every single day as a result. So we can all be caught asleep at the wheel. And there are some places that are better than others, and there are some places that are woefully bad at this. And the third conversation is the one Claudia was talking about, which is the conversation not between ourselves, not with politicians, but with consumers. And that's a long, hard road, and we haven't even started along that road. I have a son at university in the UK. He knows what his dad does for a living, and yet the temptation for him to steal content for his course is so great because it's so easy, and he's not always aware of what he's doing. So we have a big job there. Sorry for such a long answer to a short question.
Question number 2. Anybody? Within the panels and outside? Okay.
I have recently graduated from a university in Canada, and part of the research that I did for my course was based on the Copyright Review Act, which is currently in progress in Canada. So during that process, I had the benefit of reading through the testimonies of all the publishers, the educators, Access Copyright, who are coming giving the testimonies in the House of Commons so that the committee can review. My report, through the different testimonies and reconciling what every aspect of the industry is saying, I could identify that there is a gap between what is being produced and how it is being consumed. So universities are going increasingly digital. They are more or less subscribing to subscriptions, big aggregators, and that's where most of the money is flowing. The publishers are more or less unaware. Now, they have fair dealing in Canada, and they do not have a copyright collective mandatory payments in place. So the access copyright exists, but nobody's paying it. And the educators say they are paying more and more money towards the content per se, but the money is not coming back in the country, it's actually flowing out of the country through big publishers. So how can this be managed?
You raised so many interesting points there. Access copyright is the collecting society in Anglophone, English-speaking Canada, and there is a comparable French-speaking one called Copibec in Quebec. And you're absolutely right. They send, when copyright was healthy in Canada, those two collecting societies sent millions of dollars to me for onward distribution to American publishers and authors. And those millions have largely disappeared to zero in the last 5 years. Now, you may say, well, big deal, if large American publishers are hurting a little bit, who cares? But also, local publishers, small publishers, are really suffering. And you know, small indigenous Canadian publishers in areas like poetry and local history and so on, many of them have simply closed down. And they will never reopen. It's as simple as that. Because their primary revenue stream was not the sale of books, it was the reuse, it was the permissions revenue for course packs, etc. That money is never coming back. And the 5-year review that you've referred to, which many of us have been contributing analysis to and so on, I really hope it leads to the Canadian government being so embarrassed about their diminishing profile on the world stage as a country that fails to protect its authors and fails to protect its local publishers. But I don't think it will. I think they're unembarrassable, frankly.
Not our government.
One more question?
Yeah. Can you tell us a little more about the torch?
Sure. The torch is a great story.
More torture.
More torture. The torch story comes from a conference in Vienna that I spoke at several years ago. And the preceding speaker was from the Secret Intelligence Service, MI6. And there's only 2 officers of MI6 that are allowed to make their names public. The chief executive and this guy who was the head of IT. And there's nothing worse than following a spy on a presentation. Because he has all these glamorous stories. He was that character who gives these fancy watches to James Bond. This was M, whatever. And what's his name? Q. Yeah, don't ever follow Q at a conference. It's because I was the poor guy who coming up to talk about European copyright law after one of the most glamorous presentations I'd ever heard. But this guy, Q, said to the audience, and he was politically motivated, he had a great punchline, but basically said, how many of you read the terms and conditions you signed? And that's it. First question was, how many in the audience have smartphones? We all put our hands up. How many of you have downloaded the Torch app? Everybody hands went up. How many of you read the terms and conditions of the license? All the hands stayed down. And then he displayed on the screen, at very fast speed, all the things that you'd given away for the Torch. And then he slowed it down, and it was a summary slide. And basically, for the Torch, you had given away your right to have all your text messages analyzed, all your incoming email analyzed for text and data mining purposes, and you'd given away hundreds of rights for a lousy Torch that you never used. And at the end of it, his punchline was, and you're worried about the security services. They're the last thing you should be worrying before you fall asleep at night. It's the stuff you voluntarily give away to big corporations that is a real threat to your security and privacy. Delete your Torch now.
We can't.
You can't. So that's the Toy Story.
Thank you. That is very illuminating indeed. Question number 3.
What is the process?
One sec. Take this mic.
Yeah. What is the process if we want to extract from some online content for our book while writing, especially from Google or Wikipedia or something online?
So the question is, what do you do if you want to?
What is the right process to take some excerpt from online content from something like Wikipedia or say Google?
Well, we have a copyright lawyer in the audience here. He'll tell you that with a specific Indian application. But Safia might be better qualified than me to talk about that.
Yeah, so if you are attributing a link to something, it's one thing. But if you're taking the entire content, it's liable. You will be liable for an action. There's a very interesting case that happened in India that involved Sunil Gavaskar and Rupa Publications, where a book was being written, and in that book, a certain controversy that had happened in the dressing room was taken as part of a different book story. And the issue raised was that this is not a substantial copying because you only have one narrative and the entire text of the context of the second book is different. But because it was so mission critical to the first book, it was held to be a violation. So the strange part, strange in the sense that sort of a grey area, that there is no precise definition of what is the extent of copying in order to make you liable. But as long as you've done an attribution, and in some cases your attribution will require you not to make an amendment of the work, in some cases it will be denied, in some cases it will be subject to royalties. Of course, there's a defense when it comes to academics, and it comes to parliamentary debates, and it comes to other purposes. Even the matter that we're talking about, the Delhi University case, is a matter that we still, our fingers are still crossed in terms of an ultimate relief that hopefully may be different, but that's a battle that is still on.
But in case if we just modify in our own way and
so that's what I say. Now, when you modify, it's like taking somebody's work and, I can't do that modification because the person has a right to the flow of the work as well. It's like taking a poetry and saying, I've changed the last bits and that's not violative. But that's, if the character of the work remains the same, which in all probability it may in your particular example, then you would be liable with the rest. And an interesting thing that I would like to touch upon is while we are debating upon the way copyright is becoming a sort of a losing battle in several countries. There are two instances where we personally believe as a law firm that India has a slightly different position. Of course, that matter that is going on with the student Delhi University is a matter which is of great concern. But generally, there are two elements. The first is that till the year 2015. India did not have a single case of damage in intellectual property. Because the idea of the judge was that it's enough that you're injuncting somebody, you're stopping his business, you're stopping people in working with him, etc., and that's enough. And there are bigger problems in life. But because intellectual property is becoming so valuable now, now the concept of damages came, ironically, in relation to publication itself. Time magazine was the company involved. And since 2015, the quantum of damages that the courts are awarding is going up. So now, in fact, damages are both punitive and exemplary, to set an example of a wrongdoing and to punish you for a wrongdoing. That's one. The second element, which is very unique and it's not within the provision of law itself, is that the government now conceives intellectual property to be something worthy or not. And they sniff a tax opportunity. So when you get a deeming notice, for example, they see content is being licensed in movies and in television shows, and they see a licensing opportunity and a tax arising out of that, they're liable to raise things. You cannot have a system where the government imposes tax, but you have a weak system in terms of collection of taxes. So there has to be a transformation in the thought process of the government, which probably will be through an amendment, which may be a tax amendment or maybe an amendment to the Copyright Act.
Thank you. I think we should.
Can I just,
Sure.
I think he asked a very simple question, what's the process? Not what's that be scared of. Can I just answer that? Since I did
Sure.
You have to get in touch with the copyright holder. And you can. I mean, we do that when, as publishers, when we are trying to find photos or images or all manner of things that we want to use in our books. Whatever you find online on Google, there is a way of getting in touch with the copyright holder, having a dialogue with that person directly, and figuring out whether they want to give you the right. Sometimes they waive the right if they feel that what you're using it for is something in keeping with their values. Sometimes they tell you how much they need to charge, and that's the way to go about it. Please don't get scared by all the legalese. Because that was all legalese.
Will I explain the three?
I think he was asking you different
Okay,
questions.
we need to get on to, were there, I just need to know, I know that Kanan had a presentation. Did you have, a small...
I thought what might be interesting.
Because you wrote in, I think...
Yes, I just said yes.
Yeah.
So in fact, I'd like to introduce myself.
Okay.
And then I would also like to thank you very much. The Jaipur Literature Festival for inviting me to take part in the panel. And I am an acquiring editor for a French publishing house. A French publishing house, Édition Robert Laffont, that has existed since 1941. And by acquiring foreign fiction, I work with foreign authors, publishers, literary agents. I then commission a translation from from a foreign language into the French language, and then go through the proper process of publishing the book so that it reaches the French audience. French language audience, which is not only in France, but also, you spoke about Canada, Michael, Belgium, and Switzerland, and also certain parts of Africa. What I think I might be able to contribute here is, in fact, is very practical and very simple, because I'm not a lawyer, but I do in my everyday work, I'm involved in this whole process. And I think what also is very interesting is I'm acquiring, say, in terms of the copyright law, I will have a limited license from trying to think of maybe a Chinese author, for example. So I will have a license for maybe 10 years to publish that person's work in France. I will then, when commissioning the translation, I will have a contract with the French translator, and that French translator will in fact have the rights that is in the French and European, and Zafir, you also mentioned the civil law, the European civil law system, which is what we work under. And for this case, what happens is, it's called the droit d'auteur, and this is the author's right. And basically, in this system, the author is at the center of the system. The author as a creator is at the center of the system. So, and he has, bless you, and he has, he or she, the author has basically four essential, it's a human right, it's a moral right. And the first one is, of course, the most important, is the right of, in French you say paternité, you could probably as well say maternité, in other words, that the author is recognized as the creator of the work. In other words, the title is on his name is on the book. Then you also have the author also has the rights for the integrity, which you also mentioned, and then disclosure, whether or not the person wants to publish the book or not. And finally, also the right to take back the work. In other words, to no longer have the work published. So, and again, in my day-to-day work, the contract that I have with the translator also protects these works, because the translator is the creator of a work, which is intimately linked, of course, to the original work. But say after my period of limited license, where I'm no longer, I've decided to no longer renew the rights to this work, well then in that case, another publisher may want to publish the work. He would then contact the translator, because again, the translator is the creator of his or her translation. It's a woman called Lynette Owens wrote a very interesting, you probably know it, Michael, very, very interesting book called Selling Rights. It's a sort of handbook for those who are in the industry. And she quotes Dr. Johnson at one stage, where he says, I think, only a blockhead would write except for money. And I mean, joking apart, obviously, this the droit d'auteur is the way in which authors are properly remunerated for their efforts, translators too, and well, again, obviously, what we do every day is we try, and at the same time, through translation, sharing, but also and seeing that there's a maximum audience for our work, but also protecting the rights of the author and the translator.
Thank you very much. Kanan, you had a presentation, did you?
Thank you, JB and Anita, for this opportunity. I'm going to make a few remarks on copyright in the Indian languages in general and in Tamil in particular. And for the purpose of this presentation, when I say Indian language, it does not include English, though English is an Indian language. Yeah, okay. So the premise which we got on email about this panel, that copyright is under threat globally. I think it's not very true of the Indian language publishing context. And I do not wish to generalize the context because every Indian language has its own system. I do know that, for example, my neighboring language, Malayalam, has a far better way of complying to copyright than Tamil. But I think in many Indian languages, copyright is not very strictly adhered to. So when it's not adhered to, it cannot be considered. So for most purposes in Tamil, copyright has so far been an option and not the law that you have to follow. But that is changing, of course. Writers are hitting back in social media. Media is following those complaints. And so it's just now that publishers feel the heat to comply to copyright. So far, star writers might have got some money. And if you are really a fighter, you might have got some money. But as a rule, I don't think publishers pay writers what they deserve. I always remember a line from a very important writer in Tamil. He said that how can you cheat a Tamil writer of copyright when he does not write for money in the first place? So that's generally the situation. So another thing is that, while copy left has been sort of an aspiration and an idea for many in the world, in the state of Tamil Nadu, partially it has been in practice for nearly 60 years now. So I want to talk about that because I think that is unique to the state of Tamil Nadu as far as I know in the entire world. It is the system that by which the government of Tamil Nadu would pay money, buy the copyright of an author, and then sort of give it to the public. That anybody can publish, there are no copyright issues involved. So that process is called nationalization.
So sorry, it means the state buys the right.
Yeah. But it does not keep it, it sort of opens it up for everybody to use. So this how this happened is very interesting. Our national poet is ManasiSubramaniam Bharati, and he passed away at a very young age, and his family was in poverty, and soon they had to sell copyright in bits and pieces, and it all got very complicated. And after he passed away, he became a much bigger figure, and by 30s he was sort of a symbol of Tamil culture, and by 40s, even bigger thing. And then a huge public clamor started saying that nobody can own the copyright of Bharati, he belongs to the people of Tamil Nadu. And then the government reacted to that, and I think by 49, the then Chief Minister, he called the family, he called the copyright holders, he paid them all money, and very systematically the government took over all the copyrights. And then they tried to publish Bharati's works. Now, governments can't do that. So they realized they can't do that in a short while. By mid-50s, they decided that we won't do this. We'll just give away the copyright so anybody who wants to publish the books. So that was the first instance. Once the methodology for that has been set, then all the following governments, now and then, for a very big writer. They started doing this. But from what I've noticed in India generally, that when any government of India decides to patronize culture, it all starts in a very well-meaning manner, then the rod sets in, and sooner or later it goes to the dogs. That is what I have seen so far. So now what has happened is that corruption, nepotism, all that has come in, and they have done about 130 writers so far. And about a quarter of that I won't even recognize. So it's not a honor anymore. So that's how it happened. So we have had an opportunity to look at sort of a partial copyleft in practice. So I thought I'll share my experience of the pros and cons of that process. And if you want to know the story of this unique story of Bharati being nationalized, there's a book in English now, Who Owns the Song, by A.R. Venkatacharya. And I also like to make a comparison with what happened in the case of our national symbol, Tagore, with Bharati. Tagore, copyright was enforced very strictly for a period of 50 years. It was a very strong hold. And then to continue that hold, they changed the copyright law of India and made it 60 years. So I think this comparison with what happened with Tagore and Bharati, I think that's something that we should take note of. So the major thing is first, the honor was there, now the honor of nationalism is not there anymore. But like I said, that Tamil writers hardly make money of writing, it's a labor of love for them mostly. So when they pass away, when they write a will, they don't clearly assign their copyright, they don't bother because the family is not bothered, they are not bothered. Now if a publisher wants to publish the works, it gets really complicated. Too many copyright holders, after a generation you don't know whom to approach. So when the book gets nationalized, it's always very nicely cleared up for the publisher. They can go ahead and publish his works. So that is one positive thing I see about the process of nationalization. But the negative aspects, I think what we can see now are many. One, if the author is a best-selling author, there is a price war between publishers, and that means the quality of books goes down and down. And you can't publish a good quality edition, and so that makes it that sooner or later there is no good edition of the book in the market. Those writers very popular, and most of the books of nationalist writers remain out of print. So that is interesting because, like I said, if they are truly very nationally honored by writers, it should be in print, so that's not the case in the first instance. And number two, that let's say they are not a very big selling writer, to publish them, the publisher needs some guarantee that only he can publish. Otherwise, he won't take the risk. That means the books go out of print. This is very, very contrary to what was the intention of the scheme in the first place. So when copyright goes, the moral right over the work also goes away. I mean, not legally, but in the public perception. So what happens is publishers feel free to condense the work, to change it, to adapt it, to play around with it. So that's very tragic. And so that's a very, very negative aspect of this process. I'll just give you one example of what happens when you are publisher. There are many publishers who focus on publishing the nationalized books, so they don't have to pay any copyright. So they're very happy with that. And so one publisher I know, he specializes in publishing very cheap editions of nationalized books. And for some strange reason, he thought now that they are nationalized, there's no rights over them, he can dedicate those books. And he dedicated all the books he published to his mother. And after some time, he realized that the readers are not getting the point. They think all the writers have decided to dedicate the books to their mother. it's not clear enough. So now there's a picture of the mother of the publisher to make it very clear. Now, this is a very commendable sentiment, this admiration for mother, but I'm not sure this is, ethically where this stands. Because, like I said, the moral right went away with the, cost of losing copyright. Yeah, just one more. Since, there is nobody to sign a contract for a nationalized work, what happens is that the works don't get translated to other languages. And there's no way you can push a work beyond your own language. So these are negative aspects of the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Khan. Arpita, you said something, and then you're next.
Yeah, can we also have a question?
Yes, of course. We just thought these are people who wrote in saying they wanted.
I'll be really short. I just wanted to put in a word for Creative Commons in India because I know I'm the only voice for Creative Commons here, but there should be many more. Because I really want to, start where Michael began, which is that, it is a fact copyright law is way behind technologically and commercially. And really Creative Commons has been one of those efforts, very, very gifted effort, I think, to try and bridge this gap, this divide. I must say, there's a lot I'm still learning about Creative Commons, but it's something I got interested in a decade ago, and since then, I keep calling my friends at the Center for Internet and Society, who are the people who really look after Creative Commons, matters in India. So if you guys want to know more about that, just go to their website. For anybody in the room who's not clear, Creative Commons basically gives you 6 licenses, which is a simple standardized way to grant copyright permissions to their creative work. And all of this is within the boundaries of copyright law. You're not breaking any rules. And the licenses are essentially helping creators in retaining their copyright while allowing others to copy, distribute, and make some uses of their work, not all uses. Yeah, the license has worldwide application. It lasts as long as the applicable copyright law. Basically, what you're trying to do is that as a creator, the author, the center, and nobody else, no middle person, publisher, lawyer, nobody else telling you what to do, you decide that you're going to find a balance between overt protection, which is leading to theft, and outright theft, which is there because of overt protection, right? So that was the thinking behind Creative Commons. And as far as the licenses are concerned, between the 6 you have a huge spectrum. So the CC BY NCND, which is attribution, non-commercial, no derivative, will give the most cautious person a license which is very restrictive, almost like copyright itself, regular copyright. And if you are a more accommodating institution or individual and you feel that you're doing work that everyone should have a part of, then you can go for the CCBY attribution only license, which is almost as open as public domain, right? So it's really up to you which one you take. And now, as far as coming to India, mostly we find the CCBY essay, share alike. That's the clause most people are going for. You've heard of some really fabulous web online sharing spaces recently, like Sahapedia and Pari, Peace Signals Pari. These are open access, these are Creative Commons spaces. They are getting into publications now, so it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. There is now also an India-specific CCBY clause, which is called the CCBY 2.5 IN, which really looks specifically, because we like to think of this notion of building upon a work, and that is incorporated in the specific India-specific clause, a Creative Commons clause. For me, everything that we publish with the Center for Equity Studies, which is run by Harsh Mandar, who's a very well-known human rights activist, as you know, and he's a great believer in Creative Commons. All our books with them are under Creative Commons. A lot of our LGBT writing, particularly oral narratives, a lot of our writings about cities, particularly the ones that look at slum communities, are all English and Hindi, are all Creative Commons. Do I make this decision sitting at the publisher end? No. My authors say that they would like to put it out in Creative Commons, and then we decide to go with a license that they are happiest with within that, right? And I just want to end with saying that does this affect the actual sales of my book? No. As a matter of fact, there is this one case with a book that we published back in 2008, and we continue to put in print, keep in print 11 years later, even though it's really hard as an independent publisher sometimes to find, to keep sort of reprinting it. It's called A Little Book on Men. It's a graphic book on rape culture and Indian men and masculinities. And 3 times there have been derivative works from this book, which is in Creative Commons, and that has only made people come back to buy the book more from me. That's it.
Thank you, Arpita. Next, you had something to present.
Yes, hello. My name's Philippa McGuinness. I'm a publisher and a writer from Sydney, Australia. My publishing house, my employer is a university press, but we do a lot of trade publishing as well. And I've worked in publishing for 20 years and always assumed that copyright was the glue that kept everything rolling. What Maggie says, in fact what everyone says, resonates very powerfully with me. It was an assumption. But then I looked around and I realised that many of our readers, my friends, consumers of content, whether it be books, music, film, television, computer games, software programs, anything, were behaving very differently in the digital world to the way they would have in the analog world. And to put it bluntly, they were stealing content without a second thought. And what I realised was that all the discussion, the discourse around copyright was dominated by lawyers, with all respect to lawyers, by digital activists, so people who very often were being funded or supported by big tech, particularly Google. So they, and a number of academics who had, certain agendas, and all this is valid, but I thought the voices being left out of this conversation are the artists, the writers. Whether they're writing for screenplay, novels, non-fiction, anything at all. And so I had the idea, and this book is 3 years old now, of editing a book that would invite artists of all kinds, of all backgrounds, and many of them disagree, to reflect on their work and what copyright meant to them. And what I was really trying to do was to make copyright sexy, to seem like it mattered, that it was valid, that it was something worth believing in and something worth fighting for. And this book was certainly no bestseller, sadly, but it did start a whole lot of conversations, and some of those were quite aggressive, some of them were quite political. The book was sent to every member of the Australian Parliament. And as Michael mentioned, we've gone through many processes where legislation, which has often involved a lot of heated discussion and lobbying, and of course the wealthiest lobbyists are big tech. And they seem so big and shiny and sexy that consumers think, well, it must be good, especially because it's free. And so what I was trying to do was to show that it's not free, that there is a cost, and shift the debate. The issues are so big, there's sadly no way a single book could do this. But I was very keen to bring it back to the rights of the author. So even if the author decides that she wants her work to be made available through Creative Commons, fine, absolutely fine, but it's her choice. It's not the choice of consumers who wish it were available through Creative Commons. And so just download it or take it. But one other thing I will say really quickly, and it's to do with licensing and a point that Michael made, that even in the 3 years since this book came out, I've seen positive developments because music piracy, to use but one example, was rife. But now most people who listen to music regularly would have some kind of subscription service membership. So they're not paying a lot, artists aren't getting a lot, but they're getting something. And so I hope that legislation starts to catch up with these new models. Thank you.
Thank you. Just hang on to your questions, there'll be enough time. I just want to go through the presentation first. Aditi, you had something.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would completely concur with Kannan sir when he said that there is least infringement of copyright in India because there is barely any compliance. So at Vani, our publishing house, we thought that we needed a copyright desk, a legal desk, because we understood that the Copyright Act, as it is understood in India, was always haywire. Also because we were publishing a lot of authors from Pakistan. So the narrative in the copyright community or in the legal community was that there is no need to take a permission or pay royalties to Pakistani authors. And that kind of went against all logics. So the case, I'll just, if I'm allowed, 3 cases I have the first-hand experience of dealing with at Vani. So first case was with Saadat Hasan Manto, and our publishing house was framed in the beginning of the last decade for infringing on Saadat Hasan Manso's few stories and publishing it wrongfully. Well, the case went to the Delhi High Court, and we understood that we had to travel to Pakistan to meet Manto Saab's family, daughters, and because there was a huge confusion, there was no paperwork with the previous publisher intact, no royalties paid, and well, that's one of the legends we have at our publishing house, that we went, got the daughters to the Karachi court, got the copyrights done, and very proudly I can say that Manto was copyright free last year, but before that, for a good decade, Vani proudly collected all the copyrights, all the royalties from the language publishing, and submitted it to their daughters, and they entrusted the entire estate with Vani Prakashan. So, second case that we had at hand was about John Ilya. John Ilya is one of the pioneer shires we have now, and he's a new discovery from the Pakistani Shairi legacy into Devanagari or Hindi. And it just so happened that his 8 books are published across India without any copyright clearances. So the idea was that John Ilya died long ago and nobody knew about his wife, his 2 daughters and a son, and so again the whole cycle started, and this time I really sat down with our lawyer and asked him for some reading material so that I can understand Copyright Act like a student. I sat with the books for a good 3 to 4 nights, and I went back to him. He's a very senior lawyer at the Supreme Court of India, and I asked him, "Sir, in this whole document, I could not find one word." He said, "Which?" And I asked him, "Where is the word publisher written in the Copyright Act?" And he said, "Well, there is no word called publisher in the Copyright Act." So legally, I was shattered, because as publishers, though we are used to many heartbreaks and heart attacks, but this one was a newbie, because A publisher is reduced to a commercial agent in the legal language, and we are therefore expected to use, commercialize, and therefore just handle the commerce part of it. And we all know here, as publishers, editors, that's not all what we do. So this sweat, well, there's this fancy word I came across yesterday, sweat equity, has nothing to do with the Copyright Act. So that was my introduction to the copyright world. The third case that I'm going to talk about is, yes, very quickly, sir. Third case is about creating a awareness amongst Indian languages for creating not an awareness but an understanding amongst the publisher of Indian languages, so that we can do a lot of international beautiful literature in our own languages for our own markets together. So that's something we have been dreaming for a while now, because the agents who are there in sitting in London or New York, it's the advances against the royalties are they never balance out against the sales figures. So an appeal from this platform, if the Indian language publishers can come together, we can really look at beautiful lists, amazing authors, and we can publish them together in our own languages. And each language gets its yeah, I'm done.
You had something to present?
Just I want to discuss the current situation of for the copyright for the Hindi publishers. There are many platforms on website where our books are scanned and uploaded in a PDF format, and we have reported many of them as take out the details from contact us page, and we have mailed it. But there is no particular some action against taken by anyone. So I have noted many of the websites and many of the legendary authors which are already scanned and uploaded on the website, like ePustakalaya or Hindi.com, HindiBooksPDF.com, and our legendary authors like Nagarjun, Dharmveer Bharti, Bhagavati Chenvarma, Agir. Their all books are uploaded on a website, and there is no credit and revenue sharing with the author or the publisher. So I want to know how to get rid of that all these things, and there are some new social platforms and apps today they are launching, and they are asking writers to give their content to upload their website, and some of people are doing their just copying the writings of our old writers and mentioning their names and publishing on website, and those platforms are not checking. They don't have knowledge, or they don't have any something like that they can get to know about what the content is already published and what kind of they need to. So how can we resolve this issue? I want to know.
Okay, keep that question. We might use both your help to answer that. Claudia, you had something to say?
No, I just had a question.
Okay, hang on to questions. Prashasti.
We've been talking about a lot of issues in the ecosystem. I wanted to bring in an idea of, as guardians of the copyright, if I may use this word, there's a practicality that can be developed around it. There's a tool called IPRlicense.com, which was developed particularly looking at the ecosystem in mind, where there is not a dedicated copyright desk in every publishing house, like Aditi mentioned. Not authors are not always the authors are available to look at copyright issues. Sometimes email permissions don't work. But there's a productivity tool called IPRlicense.com which can solve a lot of issues. Awareness issues, because you can find the catalogs online, you can find the books online. That means when you Google search, you're directed to a website which says copyright available, sold to so many countries. So it also kind of sends out a message to the person who's looking at the work that this is not something for me to just take. Second thing it helps is if you do not have a copyright desk, rights and licensing person dedicatedly looking at these kind of queries, it's an automated tool. So you just simply put in instant permissions and instant rights, which allows you to automatically give sanctions to people writing into you, so you assign it, or you receive it as an email via the system, and you can decide. If you are stuck with the credibility, there's user data to go back to look at. If you're stuck with how to go about with the contract, there are support contracts, standardized contracts you can look into, and the payment gateway is seamless. So there's an ecosystem with which one can solve a lot of problems. And I just thought of bringing it as an advice for people who manage copyright to look at things like that.
Thank you very much. Do you have something to? No? You okay?
Yeah, I just wanted to tell a story and to bring a little humor into our very serious discussion. So, our most difficult problems with copyright as small publishers have been copyright theft by the government of India, which is a very difficult thing to deal with, and I'll give you two quick examples. A long time back, the National Council of Educational Research and Training published in one of their educational books 40 pages from a book of ours, which we discovered quite by chance. That little book is about 200 pages. And I got in touch with them saying, why didn't you ask for copyright? Why didn't you ask, and why didn't you write to us and ask us for this? And what are you going to do about payment? And they said to me, well, actually it's going to go out to millions and millions of children who will read it in schools. And we didn't think of payment because she's a poor woman. It's a Baby Haldar's book. And I took a call eventually as a publisher, which sometimes the practical things happen, and that we are small publishers. I thought I can't afford a copyright lawyer. I don't want to get stuck in courts. My priority is to publish. So I talked to her and said, what do you think? And because she's a poor woman, she needs the money, but she also needs the exposure. And she said, okay, let it go. We let it go. So it's, sometimes you make those difficult kind of decisions. It's happened to us a couple of times more. But most recently was both amusing and worrying is not necessarily copyright. It's to do with trademarking, I guess. So people who know Delhi know that big building that's coming up near INA. I was driving past it one day when the corner of my eye caught something and I couldn't look because I was driving. And then I got to the office and I had a WhatsApp message from various friends, and the government of India had stolen our logo, the logo of my publishing house, which is huge, like the size of that poster, on a wall that has been created to hide a construction that is going on, and which says, Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, which is the biggest campaign of the government to get women to read, girls to read. Of course, they spend all the money on advertising, and our logo is a woman reading. So there's this logo there, and it says Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao. Now I'm thinking, what should I do? Now, we've been using this logo 16 years, but because we're small and poor, we never trademarked it. I don't know whether they have done that, stolen it and done that, or whether we should go and do that now, or whether we should enjoy this and put it on social media and say, hey look guys, the government's stolen our logo, and here they are. So I'm not sure what to do, but it's both amusing and worrying, because when the state itself is a thief, and the state's might against you as a small independent publisher is something you have to consider in dealing with the legality of it. I don't know how you take a decision. Anyone driving past, please have a look, it's still there.
Thank you. This is not something you guys can answer. Just the last thing before we get into question answers. Taking off from what you said about this thing that we are doing books that we are circulating to children or students or whatever, we actually had a concrete case that was settled out of court, which was our play Charandas Chor, and our friends Orient Black Sword, who were also Seagull's first distributors in 82-83. I think it was not deliberate, but it was some overzealous manager in a local branch who decided to do a 7.5 lakh print run of a textbook at the West Bengal board, 1/3 of which was the entire Charandas chore. And they had written to me 2 months before, and I was abroad, and I replied that when I come back, please get in touch. That was the only exchange we had. And the government has this thing where if they don't respond in 90 days, it means yes. So I came back and forgot all about it, and then this book came out. It was presented to me, so I got in touch. And the initial response was not a very courteous one, and courtesy is so important in this community. But we wrote to you, you didn't say, so we thought it was yes. And then it became a case of including meeting the West Bengal board, secretary and so on and so forth, where everybody was telling me 7.5 lakh students will be getting this book, etc., etc. I said, are you charging for it? Yes. Are you making profits on it? Yes. So I said, here's a proportionate royalty, which is half of what we would normally charge. And it was settled for 19 lakhs. There is a woman out there who does theatre, who is the daughter of Ravi and so on and so forth. Nobody takes all that into consideration. Clearly, they felt that they were wrong and wanted a kind of face-saving sort of thing that was there. So I said, in future, when you do year 2 and year 3, just pay 1 rupee a book. That's all you need to do. They said yes. They asked for an invoice. Then they dropped it and replaced it with something else. So the second year student has got a whole different book from the first one. Okay, questions? Claudia, the patient.
No, I wanted to ask.
Yes, I wanted to ask you about the copyrights that were nationalized. Is this only true for authors that have passed away, or is it also true for authors that are still alive? And have many denied giving away the rights? And how much is the government paying?
Okay, so 99% of this is for others who passed away. But in one instance, I know that it was a single woman. She was sick, she was in a hospital, and she was admitted there, and she and her family will take care of her. So well-known author, so friends were doing that. Then the then Chief Minister got admitted in the same hospital, and he decided to pay her a visit. And then they appealed to him to give her some help. So there is no permission to give money to a writer otherwise. So then at that point decided to nationalize the works and then pay the money to her as a help. So partly it has also become a way of supporting poor families of writers and all that. So that's one thing. And there is no fixed amount. Governments decide randomly, depending on how much political contacts they have and who it is. But more or less right now the figure they have settled down is 5 lakh rupees.
For how long? Forever?
Yeah, it's finished. So that is, some families actually, they appeal to the government because they will never see 5 lakhs out of it. That is the comment on publishers, not the government. So the other question you asked was that, have I answered? Just one more question.
Whether any writers have denied giving.
Yes. So what happens is that initially, in the first instance of Bharati, it was done very beautifully. Actually, the family had given away their copyright for very small money. The Chief Minister realized that. So he brought the family in and paid them some money. He brought all the copywriters in and paid some money. There was a very rich man, expert in the copyright. So he brought them in and he volunteered to give away the copyright in the meeting. So that's how it was very beautifully set. But later on, the governments, I think they did not realize that they don't have the right to do this. They don't have an actual right to do this by themselves. So what they did was later on, that they were on the assembly, while presenting the budget, they would just declare that so many writers have been nationalized. And then it is for you to go and say, I don't want this to happen. So it became that way. But finally, a particular government was very unhappy with us for our editorials. We wrote the magazine, and they decided to announce that my father's works are nationalized.
I was wondering whether that.
Yeah.
Because
So that,
his father is a big writer.
yeah. So then immediately I countered that, and then on the same year they also nationalized the work of another big writer, whose son was also a copyright lawyer. So both of us got onto that. For the first time, the government realized that they can't do this, and then there was a big lapse, and there's really slowed down now. This doing this 20-30 writers per year, it was going crazy completely. Now the slowdown really, and they're doing 2-3 writers now and then. But usually after the family is clear to them and all that. It is, yeah. So that's all.
Okay. You had a question?
Long enough.
Okay, I have 2 mics but 1 question. Hi, I'm Vaishali Mathur. I work with Penguin Random House India, and I've been handling rights now for, I think, about 3 or 4 years. My main question is that I do agree about the copyright laws and how they get violated and how people don't actually take permissions. But I wonder, and this is to all the publishers here, do you worry about the license period? Because that becomes my basic worry, especially when we are giving rights to Indian language publishers in different languages. What really happens is that we don't know, it's a complete black hole to us after the license period expires. So we don't know whether they are publishing or not. And I was wondering if Mr. Safir could suggest, if there is a system where after the license is expired, do they come back to you and tell you, okay, unless they come back to you and ask you, you don't know whether they are going to continue to publish it or not. So is there a clear-cut system there where at some given point of time they are supposed to come back to you and say, hey, the license has expired, or, because there are a lot of people changing on the rights desk as well, so there's no sense of continuity here.
It's actually, sorry, what was that?
Well, you can easily invoke this as part of your agreement itself in the initial stage, because in a typical situation, what you would say is that you have an agreement for a certain term and you're maintaining an inventory, and then you have an exhaustion period for them to run out of supplies, which is in reasonable terms maybe taken as 3 to 6 months. So if there's a violation of that, then you can go to court and say that there is a violation of the inventory count.
Actually, what happens is, because we deal in 70% of what we do is rights from the French, the Germans, the Italians. So typically now, where you would get a letter saying that your term's expiring or you get a warning almost a year in advance. Is certainly what I get from the German publishers, and then you then give them an update. Do you want to continue? Do you want to reinvent it as a paperback? Are you doing an audiobook on it? So in many cases, it's wonderful for us when you do a quick recce yourselves. Go back to your computers and look at how much you've sold. You want to do this again, you can then renew. Depending on your relationship, money changes hands, sometimes it doesn't change hands. It's possible. There's also cases where sometimes translations take 7 to 8 years and your entire period goes, but it's a desperate book, 1100 pages. The original German or French publishers could never ever sell that. You renew it and they do it, because they can see your intent. You've spent £20,000 on translation. There must be a reason for this. Human beings are involved, translating, taking time, that kind of stuff. So it's not such a dark hole in the sense that contractually,
With Indian language publishers, I feel like still,
if you don't have contracts or you have authors you inherit with older contracts, or they don't have any sense. We're custodians of the MeeraJohri estate, for example. It's a nightmare trying to get sorting out the paperwork.
I mean, we have developed an internal software system where we are looking at this whole, getting our contracts in, and then it throws up the information that the right for a particular book is expiring, so we can actually go back to the publisher. But I feel that whenever I'm giving out a license to an Indian language publisher, I just feel that it's just going to go and nobody's going to come back. And I just have one comment on what Urvashi was saying. One of the things, like when you have to deal with this issue of the government not asking you to just forego the
money. But I felt that couldn't you just like legalize that? Couldn't you just have at least a written paperwork for you to say and get them to sign on it and say that you have actually given it free of cost, so at least it gets legalized? Because that's what I tend to do. If you just give it off, then and I say at least just put it on paper so that we know that has happened.
We did do that.
Okay, Kartika.
Just one little comment on what you just said, because one sort of assumes that this community does work on trust and all of that, but it doesn't all the time. Sometimes it does, happily. But I think one of the most shocking things that happened to me as a publishing person was that we had licensed rights for Midnight's Children in translation after a great deal of conversation and all of that from whoever. And a whole translation of Midnight's Children, which I think we had something like 12 to 18 months or something to do it in. And Neela, who is this wonderful Hindi writer and translator, worked on it, a great translation we've done. And the editor wrote to the agent saying that it's taking a little bit more time. So yes, I know technically this month we should have published it, but give us a little bit more time. We've got the translation case. They sent us. They said, "I'm sorry." And I remember very clearly we paid ₹1 lakh for that because it was Rishte and Midnight's Children, and that was unaffordable for us in translation terms. They just said, "I'm sorry, you've passed the date," and they cancelled it. And that wonderful translation is sitting around. And we can't publish it, nobody can publish it, and then of course Neela is no more. So I just feel like sometimes we should also extend some of these courtesies to the Indian side of things, because it is partly, I think, because we are
Well, I guess
seen as Indian publishers, not
legally they're
trusted.
within their rights to do so, which actually there. We're facing a situation at the moment with a wonderful German publisher that we're close to. We've taken on 3 volumes of a wonderful woman no longer alive. And it's taken years because each book is almost 16 to 17,000 pounds worth of translation. Because in my excitement, I didn't see the size of the book, just the passion of the translator when I acquired them. The third one has suddenly come to the attention of random. Yeah. And so I said, take it back. If Penguin Random is going to pay £19,800 for translation, you're most welcome. I'll bring the other 2, thank you very much, but I'm not paying you more for this. So, it's very difficult, but 99%.
Sometimes wonder if English language publishers in India talk like that about Indian language. English language publishers talk like that about Indian language publishers. And maybe that's not true. Maybe I'm sure there are publishers who are entirely capable of being.
If I may ask,
Last question.
No, just to reply to that. I mean, that seems, as you say, legally the situation, but as you also said, we are people working in publishing, so I cannot believe that the agent in President, whom I know whom you're talking about, nevertheless, the chief that I know, that is totally incomprehensible. It's totally unprofessional, and I mean, it makes great. Oh, I'm sorry, if I'm speechless when I hear that.
It's a little bit racist, let's say.
Okay.
That's what I think.
All right. I'm going to request 5 minutes each of summing up and then thank everybody and get the hell out to lunch. Please.
So should I sum up or should I try and answer some of the questions that were being, okay. So I'll have to come back to your questions. Your first point, if I remember, was about websites that plagiarize works. I think it's the easiest thing to do and get an injunction against them. It's just the fact that you have to identify a work and go to a relevant court and get an injunction. I don't think it's a complex task. As far as the second issue is concerned, there are 2 levels of changes that are the issue of digital copying. There are 2 levels of changes that are, and the apps that you spoke about. 2 levels of changes. One is at the government level, where, as you are aware, today liability is being impugned, is being assigned even to an administrator of a WhatsApp group. I think a lot of WhatsApp groups themselves are sources of digital replication, and they would be liability claims. We have just gone to court and got an injunction order against an e-commerce website for just selling. They claimed that they were selling genuine goods, and we said even that's not allowed because what you are doing is still without permission of the brand owner. That's a case involving the red sole on the shoe. And the court has injuncted them, saying that there is liability of service providers as well. And as you are aware, administrators now cannot pass on messages more than 5 times. So those are developing areas of law. They'll get integrated with copyright in due course.
Those are individual apps, not on WhatsApp.
So you can injunction the first example that I gave is you can go to court and get an injunction against anybody. The difficulty is that the app is not based in India. How will you enforce that? That's not something that the courts can do because that's based upon your disclosure. Then you should go to the country where they've got an app which may be very cost ineffective for you. And some of these things are, pseudo. I mean, the people are not known, so you really can't do much about it. And to answer your particular question, you have a right that exists in your logo. You have a right that exists in your logo irrespective of whether you protected it or not. Both under trademark and under copyright. Copyright does not require registration. In trademark, you have a law. In India, we are passing off. So you can invoke your rights and stop the government, I think. But in a practical sense, it's easier to write a soft letter just praising them of your rights than probably, backtrack. Or the other thing is on Monday they have the Swachh Bharat campaign talk here, and I think you can raise up the issue with those guys and you'll probably solve it.
You could negotiate a Bharat Ratna.
I could negotiate some money from them. I'd rather have that than the Bharat Ratna. So, sorry.
I'm very sensitive to the irony and the paradox of talking about threats to publishing and threats to reading when outside these walls there are hundreds of thousands of book lovers walking around, listening to authors, talking about books. There is a paradox here. When publishers and booksellers come together as an industry, we always want to talk about the things that are killing us. It's technology, or it's attention deficit, or whatever the latest villain is at the moment. And we have a remarkable power as an industry for resilience, and the resilience comes from the fact that we do something really powerful, we do it well, and it's highly thought of by the millions of people visiting festivals like this. So there is a paradox, and we shouldn't be scaremongering, but this industry is based on particular foundations: freedom to publish, freedom of expression, and also, I would argue, copyright. The right of an author and an author's publisher to earn the rewards from the fruits of their labor. And I don't believe for a moment that the sky is falling in on this industry, but I do think there, particularly in certain parts of the world, freedom of expression, freedom to publish, these are things under threat. And copyright is facing, I believe, as Philip was saying, the best organized, most well-funded threat to its existence since the 18th century. And we can ignore that if we wish, but we do so at great peril, I believe. I know I'm preaching to the choir, as we say in the West, preaching to the converted here. But the vigilance has to begin in the industry before it can ripple out to the consumers.
Thank you, Michael. I can only speak for myself personally here in terms of the fact that I came into this panel slightly skeptical, and I have gone back converted, so thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Sorry, Prasasti has one last raising hand. Please do it, and we'll.
Well, it's very nice to sit here and address each other's issues and talk about the issues that we have. I think there has to be a parallel out there in the front lawns about copyright awareness, because we all agree that there's something that people don't understand about somebody's work. So at a festival like this, there needs to be one panel right there in the front lawns with somebody talking about what copyright is.
Get it next time.
Okay, we'll try and get that next time if we can. Thank you, everybody.
the precious people who come together and give this book a life, publishers and publishing. It's their experience, 65 experts being correct. I mean, we got the inputs in just a month and a half. So firstly, a very big thank you to all our precious contributors. And Natasha, I mean, her dream and her objective with the book is, and she believes in all about book publishing. And I can just say thank you for Jaipur Book Club for this opportunity. Thank you so much. This is a very happy moment. This book is, I used to call Natasha my book boss, and every morning it was very nice to wake up to her WhatsApp, what's happening, how are we getting this book done. So thank you all for giving this book away. I just say thank you. Thank you so much.
Request you to please read the request Butalia to unwrap the book and go.
Okay, I think I have to stand up for this. Tear off the cover. I will not complain about saving the paper.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I'll call Ravi.
Mansi is here? Yes. So we don't exactly know who's moderating the meeting. Is it Naveen who's moderating?
Chatterjee, Naveen and Manisha are the heads of the
Oh, we're the heads of the family. Okay.
Manisha, do you have any objections as heads of panels to
No.
recommend her as the moderator? No, not at all.
I knew that was coming. I knew that was coming. So I'm not going to moderate it, but I'll get us started. And what I would suggest is that we do a quick round of just saying who we are around the table. And when we start speaking, so Prashasti has to leave to catch a train. So she asked if she could make her few points before and then go off. So we'll ask her to come in first, and after that we'll just go around the table. And those of you sitting at the back, if you'd like to occupy some of the empty spaces, please feel free to do that. But if you want to hang around there, that's also okay, because it's a small enough room. So I'm just going to put a few points on the table that may be interesting to discuss. Obviously, what I'm saying relates to Indian publishing. And at its most obvious level, looking at gender equations in Indian publishing, if we just look at the numbers, the figures of the numbers of men and women in publishing, we find over the last 10 years increasing numbers of women entering the publishing world, publishing industry, not only in English but in all other Indian languages as well, which is nothing surprising. It happens the world over that women are coming into publishing, and it's also not surprising that most of the time they are the ones who are handling content. They are the editors, and they do not necessarily occupy CEO positions. Although I would say that in India, many of the independent publishing houses, which are doing a lot of really cutting-edge work, are headed by women. So there's Arpita here, who heads Yoda, and Manisha, who heads Manan Books and was previously the head of Pratham Books, the editorial head. And I think that actually, in a sense, that makes us, at least I want to suggest, we should rethink this business of the glass ceiling. Why should we only privilege money as the glass ceiling, which women aspire to, can we think that we actually are in charge of content and in charge of much of what goes into publishing? However, can we also ask ourselves, does that result in us publishing more women authors? Does that result in women authors being the big authors and their books getting promoted? Does that result, I mean, in the last few years we've seen that women's books have won far fewer prizes, awards, literary awards, than men's books have, although that's beginning to change. And recently we have the first Women's Literature Award, the Prabha Khaitan Award, which is just instituted in Calcutta last week. But that's one aspect of the problem. The other issues I think that would be interesting to look at is how do gender politics play out in the workplace? So one of the questions that has been asked in light of the recent Me Too movement in India is why we've heard so little of it in publishing. And is that because of the kind of collegial, so-called familial relations within publishing? Is it because publishing houses, large and small, are reluctant to set up internal complaints committees and take on board the sexual harassment law? Is it because we really don't think it's an issue for us? And what would happen if we were to transform our workplaces into egalitarian, sensitive, inclusive, caring workspaces for all genders, men, women, and all the identities that lie in between? Are we even beginning to think of those? So I think that's another issue that we need to take up. How do we relate in terms of gender with all the people from whom we buy services? So printers and paper dealers and distributors and so on. The distribution, the marketing, the sales industry is hugely male dominated. There are a few women. I think Speaking Tiger's sales head is a woman. That's rare. There are a few of them. But, you know, how do we feminize that space, if at all? Why should we feminize it? Do we gain anything from it? Is there a way we can think of policies within publishing which can actually privilege safe spaces, where we can also look at the contracts that we hand out, we can possibly look at the past histories with the new knowledge that we have of potential writers and see whether we want to take them on board or not, whether we can look at the freelance editors we hire, who work with us and so on and so forth. So is there a way in which in practice, in dealing with our authors, in dealing with our legal documentation like contracts and so on, in dealing with freelance people, in dealing with all the other people that we deal with, is there a way that we can bring in certain practices which can help us to also think of gender inclusive, gender sensitive, gender caring workplaces? And why is it that we have not really paid that much attention to that? So I don't think it's only a matter of putting in place a sexual harassment committee, putting in place the internal complaints committee and reporting every X number of months to the district office or something like that as the law mandates. But can we actually go beyond the law? And can we think of how also our workplaces are changing? Because so many people work from home. For so many of our editors, writers, the workplace is their computer, which could be in use in a cafe, it could be in use elsewhere. So online abuse, online trolling, and all sorts of online problems that are defined in terms of gender, is there a way we can look at that? I'm not even talking of separate toilets for men and women. When I joined publishing in the Oxford University Press in 1972, there was only one toilet. Men and women had to use it. It's changed now, but now we also need to think of other identities and all of that. So I'm just saying, if we can put these on the table and talk about some of these issues, maybe we could look at more than just the numbers of men and women in publishing. So, we could start by having said all that. I didn't introduce myself. I'm Urvashi Butalia and I work in Zuban Publishers, feminist publishing house. So can we just go round and everybody introduce themselves? After they close. Can you wait till they you have to leave at 4:30. So let's do a quick round. I think this, you have to use the hand.
So So I'm Manisha Chaudhry. I run a small independent children's publishing house. It's a not-for-profit called Manan Books.
I'm Marie Desmeures. I'm an editor from France. I publish French literature and some foreign literature from Africa, translated from English, but from African writers. Oh, I didn't say, I'm working at Desmeures Publishing.
My name is Ravi. I'm from Deecee Books. I'm based in Kerala.
Ravi Singh, working speaking Tiger.
I'm MeeraJohri from Rajpal and Sons.
Renuka Chatterjee, I'm also with speaking Tiger.
डॉक्टर अनुश्रीराठौर उदयपुर से हूँ मैं अरविंद पब्लिकेशन मेरे पब्लिकेशन का नाम है मैं हिंदी और राजस्थानी में बुक पब्लिश करती हूँ और मैं हिंदी में कंफर्टेबल फील करूँगी इसलिए मैं हिंदी में ही बोलना चाहूँगी
PrashastiRastogi, I work for the Frankfurt Book Fair Delhi office.
Shweta, Khurana, I work with all about book publishing.
I'm ManasiSubramaniam, I work at Penguin India.
Hi, I'm Arpita. I work for an independent publishing house called Yoda Press.
I work with Singh Books, Naveen, Kishore.
Hi, I'm Tanya. I work with Arpita.
Esha, I also work at Yoda Press.
I'm Sunandini and I work with Singh Books.
What about you?
I'm a writer from Australia seeking a publisher in India.
Chandana used to be with Social Science Press, now doing some writing.
I'm Vaishali Mathur. I'm with Penguin Randomers India.
I'm Christiane Dalmet and I'm working in a local authority.
Maggie Doyle, acquiring editor in foreign fiction at a French publishing house, MeeraJohri.
Hi, I'm Esha. I work in this magazine called the Indian Quarterly.
Hello, Victoria Deritz from French Embassy Book and IDs Office.
I'm Claudia Kaiser, Frankfurt Book Fair.
Well, I'm Roshni Trivedi and I'm representing Business Stories. I'm representing Mr. Aslam Charani, the author of the book. I'm Shweta. I'm a writer.
Jaipriya Vasudevan. I run a literary agency called Chatterjee.
I'm Anusha. I'm a lawyer turned writer.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Manisha and Naveen to quickly come in with some introductory remarks and then we'll turn to Prashasti. And then it's open.
So I think Urvashi's sort of done a very broad brushstrokes beginning of painting the canvas of what we should be talking about today. And as she was talking, I was thinking about a conversation I had with Aditi Maheshwari when we were going back to the hotel. And she was telling me that she's completely strong on content, but she really worries about sales and marketing because she feels she can't enter that space. She feels unsafe. And I said to her that, somebody like you who's been in such an established publishing house and who has many resources at your command, if even you feel unsafe, what is going to happen to other people who do not have your resources? And then we started talking about why one feels unsafe in the first place and why that particular arena of publishing seems to be closed off to a number of women. And that sort of made me think that, when we talk about content having the larger number of women, because they have options such as work from home or flexi time and so on, there is always this undercurrent of as if it's a special sort of privilege that is being accorded to me that I'm allowed to work from home. Whereas actually in the industry, if there are a number of women who are making very solid contribution to the industry as such and are actually raising the bar in every sense of the word, it's not a privilege actually. I think it's something which needs to be the norm, and we really need to rethink why we think of it as something that has to be done so that women can be accommodated, and why that kind of thing does not happen in the sales and marketing thing. It happens because it is a very gendered space. It is where all the sort of evening drinking happens or the backslapping happens. So therefore, somebody even like Aditi can feel unsafe. So what I think all of us, since we are all here from the business, what can we do which is particular to our industry so that we make it safer and it is easy to move from content to sales should one wish to, as well as how can it be less gendered and more focused on the business of what needs to be done. I think those are important things to consider. The other strand that you mentioned, which was to do with the Me Too movement, I think that is something that is going to hit a lot of us very close to the bone, because if you have an author who's been named in the Me Too movement, will you continue to publish him? And if it's a woman who's been named, would you continue to publish her? How would you deal with it? I think we all need to grapple with these kinds of issues. So when we're talking about gender equations in publishing, we're talking about publishing in particular, but we can only talk about it in the larger context of where we do our work, which is in a matriarchal world. And I think we definitely have the opportunity to do something so that the spaces which have been closed off because of the gendered nature of how it is today, I'm sure we can take steps which are very concrete to make that a place which is of ease. And I'm sure that a lot of us who came into publishing because we like books, we are now equally committed to the idea of our books reaching out to more numbers of people. And I'm sure that we have possibly ways lying within ourselves to think of, that we could distribute differently. We could look at, many more ideas of how books can reach out. But since we never think of that space as something where we can enter, those ideas sort of remain nascent and they never actually fructify beyond. So that is something that was going through my head as we were talking. I'm sure as we go on, we will continue the conversation.
Michelle, there's a seat here. Thank you.
Just a brief personal thought, which is, just before coming here, I was having a conversation with Urvashi, and while she was talking, I had a kind of sense that I came into that listening, thinking in my head that a lot of what we're talking about was something I always felt I intuitively practiced over these 36 years, till she went into details of the politics of contracts, of what Manisha said, authors, translators, and more importantly, this business of personnel. This, we had a conversation with somebody else who said we wish we had some men around the office who lift cartons around the place. I don't mean that kind of thing. I mean this safety thing that you brought up, and so on and so forth. So there is an intuitive practice before the labels came into our own education. Before we were taught that, look, you need to look at this in concrete terms. So I would be happy to engage, answer questions on actual practices once we became conscious, and also talk about how you intuitively build lists which sifted in the politics of things instinctively, so that your list, people often ask me, do you have a women's list or a gender list or whatever, and it struck me that actually the content of over 900 books, there's not one that is flawed in that sense. At the same time, there are enough case histories of us having spent a fortune acquiring books from the French or the German of wonderful political, social scientists, philosophers. They're discovering their negative sides. We grew up reading them, and now they were Islamophobic or XYZ. So then you got out of those contracts because people like you and her would not want to be on the same list. So that was your individual choice. You were paid for translations. You said, here's the English translation with our blessings. We've paid the advances, we can't do it. In some cases, they wanted you to talk directly to authors you had never met and actually share openly this thing, however awkward it was.
So sitting here, I'm just revisiting the conversation we had sometime in May in Delhi, when I went to Urvashi sometime and said, I've been listening that there used to be a gathering of women in publishing sometime. There was a women in publishing delegation to Frankfurt Book Fair. We should all kind of get together on a more regular basis to see where we have come and what we need to talk about and how we can form working groups that can address some of the concerns. So we all got together one afternoon at the Goethe Institute Library and we listed out some wish lists. So I will just go back to that wish list and put out what I would love to have as a, one of the few key points out of this discussion that we're having this afternoon. One of the wish list was to meet at various festivals and also promote women writers, and one of them is happening right now that we're all sitting here at one of the festivals. So my wish list, actually out of this table that everybody's here, is also to create some sort of a support group which has a certain presence. It can be a soft presence online, it doesn't have to be, a mass thing, where younger women in publishing also find mentors to talk to. Some sort of a redressal that happens with people who are experienced. And that redressal can be on various spheres. It could be skilling, because we all know that the future is in free professionalism. World Economic Forum has done 100 kinds of studies about the open skill market. So there are skills available in this profession, so finding right matches. It could also be about standardization of employment contracts and payment issues, so that none of us feels exploited where we stand. It could also be about finding freelance skills that are overlapping. Most of the Indian publishing houses are family-owned or independent businesses which work on free teams, open professionals, so probably there's a mix and match possible there. Sexual harassment issues. There should be, some go-to person, because not all organizations have committees where you have a peer group to go to. So that is an important agenda to be talked about. And cross-skilling. I want to request to widen the net of publishing and consider us as a content space, because there are a lot of other parallel industries we affect. I mean, we've all been talking about how book is not only between the covers and it travels into different forms in media. So also include book selling as a profession, include media, include social, everything into this wider net so that there is more exchange, and meet regularly on a forum where there are things that we can individually address. So that's my wish list.
Thank you. Who would like to go next? It's really open and free discussion. So
I just want to say that I'm putting it for the women in the publishing group by WhatsApp. So,
yeah,
just so everyone knows that.
Maybe we've got a list of speakers. Maybe we should just go through them. No. So Anushreeratore, you were one of them, right?
Can I speak in Hindi?
Yeah. So if you can speak in Hindi but give Manisha time to translate, please.
Okay. मैं उदयपुर से हूँ और जहाँ जेंडर इक्वेशन की बात है तो जहाँ तक कि पब्लिशिंग की बात है तो प्रकाशक शब्द भी नहीं है हमारे लिए, प्रकाशिका कहा जाता है, जबकि यहाँ तो पब्लिशर ही होता है इंग्लिश में तो, लेकिन जब मैं बाहर कहीं जाती हूँ तो प्रकाशिका शब्द यूज़ करते हैं जो कि कहीं हिंदी में भी नहीं है। तो ये एक तरह से यूँ लगता है कि हमें अलग कर दिया गया है, प्रकाशकों में प्रकाशिका कर दिया है। बाकी ऐसा कभी लगा नहीं है कि बाकी हो रहा है। अब तो पहले ऐसा होता था कि कुछ चुनिंदा फील्ड ही थे जहाँ पर महिलाएं जाया करती थी, टीचर बन जाती थी, ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा डॉक्टर बन जाती थी, लेकिन आज बहुत सारी महिलाएं हैं जो पब्लिकेशन में आई है, इसको अपना करियर बना रही है। मैंने तो इसको एक तरह से शौक़ के लिए स्टार्ट किया था, मुझे ये अच्छा लगता था इस काम को करना। और दूसरा, जब मैं अपनी बुक पब्लिश करवाने के लिए प्रकाशकों के पास जाती थी तो वही समस्या जो होती है कि किताबें बिकती नहीं हैं, तो प्रकाशक पैसे मांगते थे। तो मुझे लगा कि मैं इस फील्ड में चली जाऊंगी तो मैं लेखकों से पैसे नहीं लूँगी और मैं प्रकाशित करूँगी। लेकिन जब वापस मैंने अपनी किताबें छापी तब मुझे लगा कि ये बहुत मुश्किल काम है, किताब को बेचना बहुत मुश्किल हो जाता है। और मैंने जब ये काम स्टार्ट किया, मेरे काम की सबने तारीफ़ करी, तो फिर मैंने इसको प्रोफेशनल बनाया और अभी मेरे पब्लिकेशन से अभी मेरे स्टार्टिंग है, तो ज़्यादा किताबें तो मैंने नहीं छापी है, 8-10 किताबें ही मेरी प्रोफेशनल आई है और मैंने उसको बिक्री करने की भी कोशिश की है। नम्रता जी ने मुझे यहाँ एक मौका दिया आप सब लोगों के बीच में आने का। मैं बहुत ही छोटी प्रकाशक हूँ आप सबके बीच में, लेकिन मुझे बहुत अच्छा लगा कि मैं आप सबके बीच में आई और मुझे सीखने का मौका मिलेगा, मुझे कुछ करने का मौका मिलेगा और आप सबसे।
What she just said was that she feels somewhat upset that the Hindi word, which does not actually exist in the lexicon, which is Prakashika, which is like a female publisher, is what she gets called very often. She'd probably prefer the gender neutral term Prakashak or publisher, which does not specify which gender you're from. And she also said that as a profession, she did not know that it existed for women largely. It was teaching and the medical professions which were considered feminine enough for women to consider, but she's very happy that she's become a publisher. She started off small because she wanted to publish her own stuff. Then she realized that it is a fairly difficult profession to enter, but she's very happy that she has, and she's published about 8 to 10 books so far.
So can we have, I'm just going to go according to this list. Arpita, do you want to speak now or later? Okay. Okay, so that Arpita, Esha is not here. Manisha, you already spoke to Mansi?
I wanted to kind of briefly touch upon something that Manisha mentioned earlier, which is what happens when authors get implicated in Me Too. We all know that publishing contracts are incredibly hard to cancel once they've been drawn up. The decision to cancel a contract is also it's a very heavy decision to make, because do you make a decision based on the value of a manuscript or a book that has been acquired, or do you make a decision based on the person that has written it? In which case, are we putting every single one of our authors through this ethical microscope and saying, is this someone that we wish to publish? And these are quandaries that I think all of us have been thinking about in the last couple of months, certainly, but perhaps even longer. And one of the things that a lot of international publishers have started doing and have been doing for a while in some cases are they have reputation clauses and conduct clauses with their authors, which means that if contracts are cancelable on the basis of loss of reputation due to certain ethical reasons, or conduct clauses when an author actually misbehaves with the editor or a person that they are dealing with in the publishing house, in which case that is dealt with as misconduct. I think that might be one way to approach the problem, but the bigger issue is how does that decision even get made? And I don't have an answer to the question, but it's certainly something I've been thinking about for a while, because do you separate the art from the artist? And if you don't separate the art from the artist, then should we put every artist through the microscope? And I don't have the answers, but I thought it's something that we could talk about.
Yeah, I think that's that is the crux of the problem. So it would be nice if we could also hear from others if they've been thinking about this and if there are any practices in place. So, okay, thanks, Mansi, and we'll go now to Marie.
I don't know if I speak now because I will speak only about France. Maybe you first. Yes, okay. So I've prepared little information about men and women in the book world in France. Well, if you look, readers or editors, you get the impression that the book market is controlled by women, because 70% of the readers in France are women, and only readers of novels, literature, fiction, etc. There are more men reading essays or documents, but for fiction and novels, it's 70% of the readers are women. And in the publishing houses, there are 72% of women working. So you can believe, 1 minute only, that the book space in France is controlled by women. I don't know if it's interesting for you, but I could say, of course, women are more represented in the publishing house, but their wages are lower than the men's wages, of course. But in 2013, an agreement was signed by the National Federation of Publishing House in order to motivate all the publishing houses to decrease this gap of wages. So, well, the optimistic way to consider this is to say that it can only be better, but it's a pity that we had to sign this agreement. Well, but it's I think it's a progress, or it could really lead to a progress. What else? Oh yes, I wanted to say something about the gender of the word, because in English you don't have gender; it's very practical. But in French you have éditeur, which is male, and éditrice, which is female. And it occurs to me, I have on my card you have Marie Desmeures, éditrice, because I'm a woman. But figure out that I have two colleagues who asked to have on their card editor, and I find it very strange. It's like if editor sounds more serious than editrice. And yes, really. And I have an ex-colleague who's called Sabine Vespizer, who worked at Actes Sud 20 years ago, 15 years ago, and she has now her own publishing house, and it's Sabine Vespizer, editor. But she's a woman, I'm sure of that. I don't know. Well, like if yes, it's. I can't understand that. If we had the neutral, well, we could all be neutral. Edit. I don't know, editor. But well, that's strange. Well, but when you begin to consider the authors, everything is up and down, because 70% of the readers are women, but 35% of the authors of literature novels are sorry, I don't want to say no. It's more preoccupating. In 2015, 25% of the French novels published in France were written by women. 25% only. I talk only about novels, French novels. I think the statistic is better when you consider foreign literature translated in French. But so it's something crazy, because it's half. Logically, it should be about half of the novels. So in France we have in autumn the literary awards, which are very important for the book selling. And we have 4 very big awards: Médicis, Goncourt, Renaudot, and Femina. Well, consider that the jury of the Femina is only women, but in the other juries you have much more men than women. And even the Femina gives the award more often to men than to women. Oh, no. And the Goncourt, which is the biggest award, and you get a Goncourt, and that happened for us just last November. You sell 300,000 of books, so it's huge, and it's very often men. So the Goncourt was created in 1903, and since 1903, only 12 women get the Goncourt Award. So there is a real big gap between the person who the person who made the editing, and the authors who are. So some journalists lately, these 5 or 6 years, some journalists, men or women, I have to say, begin to analyze this matter of fact, and they try to understand why so many men win the prizes, the awards, the literary awards. And they say, well, if you can, well, we can accept that not everyone is so, I would say misogynist, thank you. But if only 25% of the production is written by a female, of course, they cannot be equal in the selections. And some journalists also wonder if, not being conscious of this, but if the editors themselves prefer to publish men because the men are in best position to win the award. So it's really a vicious circle, and I don't know. I hope this is getting better too. I'm a very optimistic nature because since 2000, the Goncourt Award. So in 18 years, three women have won this prize. So there is a very big progress. Well, three are considered in 18 years, it's not a lot, but when you realize that in more than 100 years, only 12 have won the award, it's a progress. So, well, let's hope it is really.
Thank you so much. So we'll move now. Meera, would you like to?
I'll just say bye. And enjoy the look forward to what comes up. Hi, Esha, Delhi. Have the best of the festival. Bye-bye.
I take off from where you quoted that in France, 72% of the women in the French publishing industry, 72% are women who are employed. I represent a family-owned publishing house, and when I joined about 20 years ago, there wasn't a single woman except me. Today, I feel happy that about 25% of our workforce is women, so I think that's a progress. Of course, it happens that the editorial and the production is totally woman-dominated, and we have a few women in accounts. However, there is a total mismatch, coming back to Mansi, what you said and what Aditi said, that in the sales arena, which is totally male-dominated, there aren't any women. Of course, the good thing is that we have a few women running bookstores, including Full Circle, but I think that's an area which is, as she was mentioning about being unsafe, given our conditions, given with that being tough. So one thing is that at least within the industry, if you're employing more women, that speaks well. The other thing, again, taking off that only 25% women have won the awards in your country. I think if we look at our awards, I don't know what the percentage is, but Gyanpeeth and Vyasaman have gone to a lot of women. But as a woman publisher, I also tend to, of course, in the manuscript is the final parameter, but I do feel a soft spot in terms of encouraging women writers to write, because they not only have to overcome the challenges of being a writer, but also of being a woman, because that in itself is another challenge, and which I think is important, because I don't think you can understand what it means to be a woman unless you are a woman yourself and have faced that situation. I mean, for instance, I used to walk down to college, and the kind of experience of eve teasing that I faced is not something a man would ever have faced or felt. So I think there is an empathy for promoting women authors, because that authorship needs to be brought forward and that voice needs to be heard. And about the contracts that you're thinking, honestly, that's the area one hasn't even applied one's mind to, because that's really a very complex and grey area, but it's something we'll have to grapple with. But I just thought I'd share the statistics, which, looking back, I feel happy about.
Thank you. Okay, the guys now. Ravi and Ravi.
Alphabetically.
I was going to say, coming from the Kerala context, now it changes after the Shabrimala, so. I mean, I've always thought, Kerala has always been first for a lot of things, actually. Fatima being the first Supreme Court judge, to Anna, Chatterjee being the first judge, Anna Malhotra being the first IAS officer. A lot of things Kerala has been first in terms of women being on a top position in everything. And as far as we are concerned, 50% of my staff, except for sales, is women actually, and they are in senior posts as well. But having said that, I mean, I'll just quote what Indra Nui has once said, like, end of the day when she ends her day, her mother-in-law calls and says, bring a couple of packets of milk along with it to make the chai, So that's the kind of thing still women face across. That's what I feel. I mean, a lot of times that is a hurdle to bring them to the top or to probably. That's a kind of hurdle. I mean, since the man has already put in their mind, so they could never come to the next post. I mean, they always treat the woman as wife first at home, so they're not able to have the kind of independence actually to do the thing. And so that's also the reason a lot of times that my senior ladies actually in my office, and one lady all of a sudden quit from the purchase, senior head of the purchase, said that my husband says you can't go to job anymore because I need to move to another job. So you better quit the job. Those kind of things still happens in the Indian context. Even in Kerala, I would say, like where the people are more liberated. And editorially, I would say, I mean, I don't know. I mean, again, it's a bias, but the performance-wise, I think the women editors do have more focused work than men actually. Where in technicalities where the men are more into commissioning. I mean, it's all probably a bias actually, but that's the way it has been. We've been trying to change the scenario, but that's the way it still works. So I think there's a lot to be done in that area. And as far as the workplace is concerned, I think publishing, of course, is one of the safest places to work actually. So it's more. I mean, at least that's what I feel. I mean. It's more of, women are as independent as men are, or men and women are equally independent. That's what my take on the whole thing.
I think a lot of there will be some discussion on it being the safest place. I could see a little free song going around the room. Ravi?
So, as Naveen said, some of us think that we instinctively have always done the right thing, that we don't think about these things. It's just that the kind of people we are. So there won't be these conflicts and contradictions, legal only misdemeanors, etc. But I'm not entirely sure about that. I don't know. So it's best for me to listen, for all of us to listen and to watch. There are just two or three things. One, from what Ravi was saying about women editors being, see, the thing is, I mean, I think it's important to make the distinction between जो आप कह रही थी, the kind of publishing environment that she would be working in, and the kind of publishing environment that most of the others are English language publishing, standards set primarily by multinational corporations, which even if they don't actually follow, at least have the rules, which are unexceptionable and good rules, etc. And also English, and therefore you're coming from a certain background. There is a certain privilege attached. So I don't think you can. I don't think it will be easy for women who work in English language publishing in larger publishing houses or independent publishing houses would also be able to understand the kind of realities that someone like you would have to face. So I think that might be useful for everyone, including women, to remember. The other thing I would say is what you were saying about contracts. Actually, it's very easy to get out of contracts. We've done that for years. So I'm surprised that you find it difficult. The publishing company has to just say, we're not publishing you any longer. If it is, a star author, big author, then there might be some complications. The gray area really would be, where, just how clear we want to be. But then I would say, why do we wait to a time when an author has done something which is unacceptable? Look at the kind of writing that is done and that is published. Regressive writing, almost every publisher has published those. Why do you publish those? I mean, why do we publish them to begin with? The other thing is, are we going to only now, because this movement has happened, be very aware only of Me Too, gender, etc. Why is hate speech all right? I don't see too many people talking about that. So I mean, if we're going to judge things for what they are, we should be doing that across the board. We can't be hiding behind the fact that this is a good book to publish, but we're not going to talk about Ramdev having said certain kind of things. It's all right to publish him, but not somebody else who's been accused of sexual misconduct. There will be subjectivity in it, of course. I mean, where there's violence involved, power has been used inappropriately, etc. It isn't so difficult to see that. And those kind of authors, even among us, within the company, we have some differences. I would not publish. I would even cancel a contract. But on the other hand, where you're not entirely sure, and it doesn't seem like such a serious infringement of someone else's rights, there's no violence involved, then what do you do? Actually, I think that's it. And the other things we'll talk about. Yeah, just one. I'm glad you mentioned, our sales colleague who heads sales. I think probably the only one in a kind of largish publishing house who does that, which is unusual. I haven't seen that anywhere. Now she temperamentally is somebody who can handle these backslapping, whatever. But why should only women who are temperamentally that way empowered be able to do it? Anybody should be able to do it. Any woman should be able to do it. The other example I do want to talk about is production. The kind of production you were talking about, is different. In the larger ones, production, you have to deal with printers and presses, and you have to, go at night and sit there, and also that's also not an easy profession. But we have somebody at Hachette. She heads production. She does all of that. So it's possible. But again, as I'm saying, temperamentally you're empowered to do it, that feeling. But the environment needs to be safe, be made safe for anybody, everybody.
Thanks, Ravi. Renuka?
Okay, I actually came into this discussion thinking that I wouldn't have much to say because I would say by and large that I've never really experienced any gender discrimination except having worked in 4 publishing houses, now the 5th, across the board. There were just 2 occasions when I did feel disadvantaged as a woman because there was a sort of men's club thing going on which was made it very difficult at times to function or to deliver as much as one wanted. But now listening to all of you, it's really opened my mind to, and I'd like to talk more about, I hope we can talk more about this in the course of this discussion, the areas of publishing which are either cordoned off or very difficult for women to enter. One of them, of course, being sales and marketing and distribution, and the other being the printing and production side, which women do find very difficult to enter and to handle. And I think I wish Esha was here because she would really be much more qualified to tell us about the kind of problems that one encounters and how to deal with them. But I think rather than just say that yes, there is a problem, I think what I'd like to discuss and what I hope will come out of this discussion is what can we do about it? Because the book trade is not going to change overnight. The booksellers, the distributors are, for now and for a long, long time to come, are going to be men. They're not going to be suddenly a lot of women coming into that side of the business. So how do we go about, if there are, and I know on the very brief occasions when I've had to directly deal with the trade, with the booksellers. I remember there was one conference, distributors conference I was sent to, and I spent about 15 minutes there and then ran because I was the only woman there were all these men, they were drinking and they were, it was obviously going to escalate into a rowdy evening. So there are these kind of problems. How do we go about sensitizing, if that's the correct word, that side of the business to women, and of course the printing and production side. That's basically what I have to say for now.
Okay, Arpita.
Urvashi, can I put in a quick word?
Yes.
I've got to leave.
Okay.
I just wanted to talk about something and I'm with the...
All right. Yes.
Here, this way.
So I've typically been doing English publishing for the last 10 years.
And now I've entered the language publishing field, and Hindi is where I'm going to acquire authors. And I feel that I can see both. आप जो कह रही हैं वो भी मैं महसूस कर सकती हूँ, and what people are talking English, that also I can feel. And I don't know if Meera you agree with me, because acquiring in Hindi and meeting authors in Hindi is a completely boys club. It's the same chai pina, cigarette pina, backslapping club, and I'm just learning to ignore it, to be honest, and just going about my business and just thinking that, oh, they are not thinking this, but I can feel the bias as a woman there, and not in English though, but in Hindi I really do feel. I don't know about other languages, but in Hindi this is a huge thing. Like when you first approach an author, he already has an entourage of 4 people standing with him there. So you begin by being the minority in that conversation, anyways. And I always feel that once I have spoken in my over enthusiasm and walked away, there is a back conversation that's happening behind me. So I don't know how to deal with it. I'm just learning to ignore and do my business. And I am actually going where no woman has gone before, kind of thing, and just like being very brash about it. But that's not something that I like. I would like to be a part of it, and not an outsider who's coming and speaking their bit and doing that sort of thing. I don't know, Meera, if you felt that way.
Can we take
Yeah.
Arpita in?
Yeah, sure.
Because the round of speakers, and then Meera, if you wanted to respond. Vaishali, will you hold on for a bit? Yeah.
No, I was thinking of a couple of things. Ravi, the point you made about privileged women and not privileged women, that gets...
Women and non-privileged women. I said include privileged and not, and everyone needs to be aware of it, including
But that includes women, privileged women and unprivileged women. And since here we are talking about gender in the publishing industry, so...
So go on.
I am going on. What?
Take your point.
But I was making a point anyway. Yeah, typical. But for instance, production in large house, that's another thing you said. My colleagues here, Tanya and Ishita, have to deal with printers and presses late at night. We're a 5-people women team. So I think we all face it. It's not a large and small thing.
I didn't know about them. I would have included them too. I only know.
No, but that should be something you should know. Why should small publishers not have to deal with production? Everyone has to do production, right? It can't automatically get made, the book, right? That's an assumption you shouldn't make, right? Even though,
Listen, you make my assumptions for me. I didn't make that assumption, but please just go on.
Because that's what you said. You said to Meera that, it's a different kind of production, yours.
Yes,
in the large
she meant
publishing
typesetters.
No, just a minute. I can correct you, but the fact is, my production head is a woman, and she deals with paper.
That's exactly the point I'm making. That is exactly the point I'm making. Yeah.
She has a tough time, I'm sure, dealing with them, because a lot of them are not privileged. But she's learned to deal, and she does an excellent job.
Yeah, what I'm trying to say is that we are all doing it, and also all of us privileged or unprivileged women, queer people, trans people, if there are any who are working in this publishing industry, are facing a situation that mostly men, privileged or unprivileged, there might be a slight difference between that and the other groups that I mentioned. I did want to point that out, and I think a lot of this has to do with, I think a lot of us have to talk a little bit about how have we in our careers dealt with young women employees coming up to us and saying, I'm having a problem with this author, I'm having a problem with this production person, I'm having a problem with this sales and marketing person, and what is the response we give to them? And really think it through. The other thing is, how many of us here who are in offices with more than 10 employees, right? Which have ICC? Can we raise hands? More than...
I was going to ask that question.
Yeah. More than 10 employees or more than... And if we have ICC, it would be a nice thing to ask before we start making.
Okay, I want to just, since we're talking about production, Just to point out, Ravi, not just you, because everyone's talking about production. I started my publishing life in 1972 as a production person. At that time, there were no women going to printing presses, and it was not a very pleasant experience dealing with Punjabi printers. I'm Punjabi myself, but the assumptions. But I think the production world has, as people are saying, opened up quite a bit more to women. And since we are on production, so Nandini, do you want to weigh in here, because you handle production and a whole range of other things? So if you just want to, yeah, do you want me to ask? Yeah.
Completely sort of identifying with what you're saying, which is that in Calcutta, when I took over from Naveen doing the design, absolutely nobody, no woman anywhere inside paper, printing, binding, which is something we're not necessarily mentioning. And I had it especially hard because I was actually following in a man's footsteps. So in the sense that everyone was used to talking to Naveen about these things, and then there was this 23-year-old girl straight from university. You were supposed to be making the coffee, really, or just doing the dusting. Anyway, so very hard, because staying nights, I have spent nights unaccompanied at the printing press. I've been to the binders, crisscrossing the city in the middle of the night. I've done all of that. Having said that, I have to also say that I have been I've been deeply uncomfortable, terribly frightened initially when I just had to do it, and you don't want to say you're frightened, obviously. You just say, no, of course I can do this, what's to stop me? Having said that, I have to say that I've been also, this is the flip side if you will, I've also been very lucky because I've been taken under the wing of many printing press operators, binders. I've had printing press operators saying, you cannot use the toilet that we use. We will walk you to the 5 rupee toilet across the road, and then they will stand there, while I'm saying, I'm terribly sorry, but I do have to pee, this is a problem. I have learned everything I know about print and production from these men, who once they just realize that I just wanted to learn, I would just say, tell me, that, and the second thing that helped when we're talking about attitudes and how we can change things is that every time there was a problem and they wanted to go above me and say, we don't want to talk to you, we want to talk to Naveen, Naveen used to say, you will not talk to me, you have to talk to her. And then they were like looking at me, so it is, you have to hammer away at it, whether you're a man or a woman, until the message gets across that, for better off. So he was like, for better off or worse, even if she screws up, she designed it, and she has to decide whether it's going to be blue or green. It's not me any longer. So, but it continues to be, even at the School of Publishing, there's a lot of interest in the sales and marketing side. People want to know how to make books work better. But there's not just a glass ceiling, there's a wall where you cannot dare to go into sales and marketing because it's such a sort of heavily male-oriented world.
So I want to just, did you want to say something, Shweta? I know you got left out. Yeah, sorry.
Basically, just want to pick up from where Renuka and Prashasti, okay. So where Renuka and Prashasti left. So basically, I really feel it's very important to have a support group. So support actually lends strength. So mentoring within the organization. So when you have a problem, A, the organization respects you. B, the organization responds to you. So if you have a problem, you know who to go to. There is some family issue like women face or whatever problem we mentioned that you need to have a hearing person to get you out of the situation and a solution. 3, if you have a complaint, a Me Too or whatever, big problem, a redressal. So the organization needs to respond. This is something which I've learned at my organization. So been working since 2004 in publishing. So one of my first visits were to the press, and happily, so they were very unhappy to see me, and I was asking so many questions, and they just looked at me quizzically like, where is this woman from Venus, Mars, or, And one thing in my marketing role I've always faced is a kind of mindset problem. And sometimes if I come up with ideas, so prejudice or judgment, why, so these are things which I've battled along. So another thing which I really believe in is who do we go to in times of trouble. So I really support the German Book Office endeavor for women like yourself who have so much of experience and expertise to come together and for people at all levels, be a guiding light, a source. I mean, we need to know who to go to. And I think a magazine like ourselves is again a good platform because we can bring voices. So, if we bring up not only what is happening in the forum, but personal experiences, stories. So we are like a bridge, I would say, not only connecting nationally but internationally. I read this article in the bookseller and connected with this guy called Kevin. So Kevin is from Blue Moose UK, a publisher. So they planned 2020 only to publish women books. So and I asked him the reasons why, and we are following up for an article with him. And so I just think it's a very collective action and small steps we can get there, but we need a support mentoring group.
Can I just say that a support mentoring group and sort of redefine that to something else which I think exists, which is I'm at any given moment mentoring many men and women, mostly women in publishing, across ages, not just the Seagull School of Publishing. I'm just saying. So what I'm suggesting perhaps is go back to the use, because it's my big romance, community. As a community, we should be able to reach out to whoever. We're constantly doing that, supposedly as owner, publishers, or whatever, but we're also doing it across rights managers who don't know something about something, or editors. So what I'm suggesting is that, in a sense, you might want to reinvent that and not just have a conscious support group in place for women or whatever kind of publishing. We also, and this is, I know it is a Calcutta grouse, but we really need to look at beyond Delhi. I mean, Chaudhry is not a woman in publishing.
I want to come back to a few points that have been raised and also hear from people who are sitting at the edges. Please weigh in with this. I think, one of the things that Ravi pointed out when he said, why not hate speech? I think if we look at the issue in terms of, is there something we can learn from other exclusions, other attempts at inclusion elsewhere in the world and in our own world? So, for example, in India, of course, language would be one thing, but I'm thinking of the ways in which in much Western publishing, black people, immigrants were excluded, and they had to make their own space, not only in jobs, but in content, in their stories, and in the awards, and all the sort of things that you were talking about, Marie. So is there because it's important to take a look at the other forms. It's not, we're not talking about gender, but yes, we must talk about hate speech, yes, we must talk about race, yes, we must talk about caste, all of those things in our environment. So is there something we can learn from that? The other thing is the question that was coming to my mind when people were talking. One is there even a possibility for management in publishing houses? And because so many of us are there now, to be proactive and sensitive to employees who are entering, and to talk to them about the possible, let's say if we're talking about gender issues that can come up, and to talk to them about how should one say it, a protocol of behavior or something. I'm using the wrong words, but some way in which you sign up to, or you say, not literally, but you say, okay, this is the policy of our publishing house where gender equations are concerned, and when you join, you must actually make a commitment to this, not hand on heart swearing, but something. Third thing, Arpita asked this question, and I did want to ask all of us. In India, since the 2013 law, how many of us have instituted sexual harassment committees and put in place internal complaints committees? So for example, I'll give you our example. We're a 99% or 90% female publishing house, and we are 9 people. So I thought at some point that we don't really need it because it's about men harassing women. Now this is me, the feminist or dyed-in-the-wool feminist, thinking that. And then my younger colleague said to me, Rubbish, you have to rethink this whole thing. And we sat down and rethought together and thought, okay, the law doesn't require us to have a committee in place until we are 10 plus, but can we put something in place that indicates that we take this seriously? And so we thought up a safe space policy, a sexual harassment policy, and went beyond the law, because the law only says that it is only meant for women, but harassment exists of men also, trans people also. So can you go beyond the law? And the law doesn't stop you from using the same principles to put in place something which is much better than what the law gives you, because the law is old. It's, I mean, so much has happened in the years since the law came in. And there's so much more which the law doesn't take account of. So I'm just wondering, is there a way we can be proactive? Is there a way we can address the issue as an issue which is really serious if we're only looking at workplaces? Suppose we're talking about all sorts of other things. So if people around can also come in on this, yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think this one.
Thanks, Urvashi. So pretty much picking up the second point, which is around management, for example, in a publishing company, plus the conversations that are happening right now. It's been in the legal industry as an independent lawyer, then working with an MNC, also with the government. Thereafter, then I was in corporate communications in the private sector, agency life there, and now as an independent writer. When I'm hearing this, it's as if, you know, flashes of the past, and across all sectors, the gender sensitivity issues are absolutely alike. And the bit which you mentioned around the management, even if you get a code of conduct in place, a policy document which is absolutely beautifully drafted, and everybody has contributed to creating something which, you know, is like the Constitution of India, you know, a magnificent document. But when it comes to implementation of it, it can happen only and only when, say, the top management has a fear of accountability. That yes, whatever action we may take or not take or choose not to take, we won't be able to get away with it. Until that system is in place, whether it's an organization of 10 people or of 1,000 people, that change will not happen. The moment that fear is in place, I mean, it could be a target for a publishing company to become known as the most progressive publishing company, not only because it gives opportunity to a lot of new authors or has X number of book sales happening, but also because the company has ethos of gender sensitivity, which is way beyond any other company does. As the most magnificent example of a publishing company where all employees are sure that what's going to happen here and what's going to work out, or whichever new author comes in, will always be mentored and get published only and only because of the capability. So let's say a gender-neutral publishing company.
Gender inclusive.
Gender inclusive.
But I'm not sure that fear is the right way to...
But the sentiment behind it.
Okay, all right.
One other thing I thought of very quickly. Diversity in our offices, in our publishing houses. I mean, are we really tackling that in terms of when we hire? Are we really thinking of it? I mean, we, after the recent Supreme Court judgment, you know, we put out an ad on Facebook saying we want to hire an LGBTQ person, And of course, that led to all kinds of crazy things, like people writing in and saying, oh, this is against the law, you can't have a quota and stuff like that. So you can imagine the kind of crazy ideas people have. But are people really thinking of diversity in hiring that?
Just one thing I want to quickly say about fear, but I was just thinking, because I've noticed this, for instance, in our office, other offices also, our floor where we sit, all the editors are large, that's a greater percentage of women there. On that floor, and also people, it's a different space. So if you segregate them, sales people on one floor, editorials on another floor, etc., etc., I think it might be a good idea just to mix all of them up, because I think something happens when people are on a floor. Certain things don't happen, certain behaviors change, so maybe that's the thing to do.
Can we hear from any of you? Do you want to come in? Chandra, Maggie, do you want to? And please feel free to just.
Yeah, thank you. So many issues going on in my head after the discussion. The name shame campaign was a sort of really kind of divide in the gender and the feminist group, from the older feminists and the younger feminists. Because the name shame didn't actually produce proof. It was this person, and complaints had gone to her. A lot of South Asian academics were on that list, and they've all written books. So I'm just wondering about the decision to take an author. Are you going to look at proof? Are you going to look at the work? How are you going to do it when you want to decide to publish someone or not?
I actually had a question for Marie after the very interesting statistics you told us about 72% women in working in publishing are women, people working in publishing are women, right? So something has been observed by me and in general in my conversations with people is that at least in English language publishing, the trend is similar in India and in other places as well, where a lot of the employees are women, but the people at the highest levels, the CEOs, MDs, are usually men. Is it the same case in France?
Yes. In the editing team, there are a lot of women editors. But for example, in my publishing house, Actes Sud, who was ruled until 1 year and a half by a woman, and then she became Ministry of Culture, so she left and her husband took the presidency. But she was the head of the company. We are, just for the French literature, we are 6 editors, women, but the editorial director is a man, and he has well, I can say he has chosen, because he's 65 or 66, he has chosen the person who will be after him the director, and it's a man. Surely a coincidence. And from what I've read, in nearly all the publishing houses, the best wage in all the publishing houses is a marketing director, and it's always or nearly always a man. So yes, you do find this.
I'd just like to on from that matter.
Which again, in France, over 72% of employees are women. However, most of the top positions are occupied by men. However, in the last 10 to 5 years, women are increasingly becoming heads of houses. Also, for example, the house I work in the last 4 years, our CEO is a woman, our sales director is a woman, we have a sales group of 9 reps in the country, and now, when I went into the company 20 years ago, they were all men. Now, 6 of them are women. So, slowly but surely, things are changing. Now, what happens if these things have, were there any decisions taken? Were there any
how should I put it, organised steps taken. Honestly, I don't really think so. I think it's just, society, education, various things like that. And I don't know, in many ways, I couldn't suggest any, sort of say, okay, we do this and this will make things better.
And there are also a few companies who have been founded by women. So it's small publishing house, but very good and reputed. Like I was talking about Sabine Vespizer, Yana Levy, Viviane Ami, and Zulma, and so on. So
completely, yes. Again, obviously, then at one stage there were women, as you say, who probably decided, okay, the only way I can do this is starting and having my own company. But now in bigger organizations, women are also taking.
I think the thing is, when you're saying that these things just happened, you don't know if there was any organized, any planned thing. I think yes, that's at the time when people like you entered, but now we know more and we know different. And now we do have structures and mechanisms around. And I think if managements do not respond to that in a positive way and take on board the possibility of accelerating and owning that change, then we'll really have failed. I think that's the difference today, that at least in our environment in India, that we actually have evidence, a push from the ground, women demanding changes. We have examples of the kind of change that they can be. We would be really losing an opportunity, as Manisha said, if we don't also open up spaces like sales to women. We are really losing the intelligence and the knowledge that women can bring to those. Yes. Any last remarks? Yeah, Renuka, I want you to think of one thing also. Because when you said that you've never faced any real discrimination as a woman, I think we so often undervalue ourselves. I mean, have you ever asked yourself that question? Why did you not make it to the top of the profession like your male colleagues did?
Yeah. Well, there is, I think, except if you own your own published house, that's different. But I think there is still that glass ceiling that a woman can reach the level of a publisher or editor-in-chief, but to cross that into the CEO zone is still off limits for most women. But I just had a point to make about this whole thing of naming and shaming and this dilemma which a lot of us are facing now, that if one of your authors is named in the Me Too movement, do you continue to publish him or do you cancel the contract? And my own view is that I think one should look at the work, the quality of work, the body of work, and what that stands for. Because if you look at it, some of our greatest writers, G.S. Naipaul, Salman Rushdie, and many others, are certainly not great examples of treating women well. Does that mean, both Naipaul and Rushdie were tremendously cruel to their first wives, and does that mean that we should stop publishing their work so their books shouldn't be published?
I think yes.
Yeah.
I may come from a point of view of a younger feminist and a new person in publishing. But I don't think we need so much proof to decide whether we should publish a male author who's been named and shamed. I hate that word. I think Me Too movement has given us this huge, valuable thing, and we should all take this and stop publishing accused.
But then, as Ravi also pointed out, if you take that stand because an author has been called out in the Me Too movement, what about authors who also have FIRs filed against them for various reasons, or criminal cases, or are known to be giving hate speeches and so on? Why discriminate between sexual discrimination, sexual harassment, and any other form of harassment?
I think you should discriminate. I think you should
In that
cancel
case,
them.
we lose a lot of authors.
I mean, that's okay. We can publish so many people who deserve to get published. So cancel all those men. Maybe publish more women. Yeah.
Women
are not blamed.
Ravi, go on. You speak.
I was just saying that these are difficult decisions, I suppose, to make. But when Rushdie was, we disagree, by the way, Renuka and I, in the office about this. When Rushdie was younger, when Naipaul was younger, publish them or whatever. Why celebrate it? Why separate this thing? You know, artists already, they can even be cannibals. It's okay. They're great artists. I'm never comfortable with that position. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, each person decides.
I think, one thing I would say, that this is a real dilemma. We have to deal with it. What do you do with writers or with the people from whom you buy services who have been named and shamed, and those who have been implicated, and those against whom the accusations have been proved? And all of us have to think about this. I don't really think it is productive to say, why do it for this and why not do it for that? Because, that's like whenever you protest about something, the right wing comes and says, you never protested about this, so what about this? You have
Sorry,
to
that is not what anybody is saying.
No, but that's what I heard Renuka say.
No,
So I'm
that's
just
not what
saying
she's saying either, because there's too much being assumed here. But that's not what she's saying. She's saying that, then, of course, a genuine thing, that because she respects the art, she likes the art, and so for her,
yeah,
it
okay,
will be the same.
fair enough.
Yeah.
So there's a question that I want to pose over there also, which is that a big part of the legitimacy that men, I'm mentioning men, but it could be women accused or named and shamed, big part of the making of their legitimacy is the social rehabilitation that we give them after they are named and shamed. And the part of the social rehabilitation is to continue to publish them. So do we think of that? I'm not saying that I would be able to decide that easily that I won't publish them, because the test really happens when it comes in front of you. But just that we must think of this whole business of social rehabilitation also, because it is very important. I mean, if they've been named, shamed, convicted, and then they are friends and in the world around us, then what do you do? I'm going to ask Arpita to come in on this, and then we'll have to close because it's time's up. But where is the other mic? Here.
Yeah, so I mean, I have to talk about this because I published Mahmood Farooqi, who was convicted by the lower court of rape, and we published. His book was with the printer when the judgment came. The contract, of course, had been signed way back, and he'd been working on it for a long time. And it was an incredibly difficult time for me. But I, at that point, made the decision that I stood by the book. It was a biography of Intizar Hussain, and I wanted desperately to stand by the book, and I did. And I think it is one hell of a book even now. But subsequently, of course, as we know, the High Court acquitted him. Of course, we have tremendous problems with the judgment that went along with that. But anyway, I really think, it wasn't even something that Jita or Tanya specifically came up and said to me. But it was something I felt in the air, in the office, that there was this discontent, which was absolutely valid, and I think I was out of town, and I WhatsApped them at one time, and at a point, and I said, let's do the final royalty calculations and clear that, and tell him that there will be no reprint from us and give the rights back. So, but again, am I going to be able to make the right decision? What is the right decision? How easily can I let go of a book? I love all the books I publish. It's a conundrum. But that was the specific instance that happened.
Thanks, Arpita. Having not given a chance to my sort of heads of the panel to speak at all, I'm just going to ask them for some closing remarks. Manisha.
Yeah, so I've just been listening to everybody, and there's so much to talk about really. I want to bring it back to the workspace. I just sort of share my experience and things that whatever I got in my workspace, whatever difference I made to the culture of the organization where I worked for a long time, was by claiming things which I really had wanted. And I think I did make a difference. But the legal framework is one thing. In the very same organization, until something happened, we didn't have a committee. And we said, why? It's because we were only 19 people and we needed to be 20 or some ridiculous thing like that. I mean, we should have had the committee, but we only have it when some little incident happened. And even there, the so-called top management wanted to not rock the boat. They didn't want to really take action. They said, it's a small thing, let's just deal with it as a small thing and whatever. I mean, So that said, what we have done now in my new organization is that we all know what the law provides or takes away or whatever. I think we came up with a charter of what we want. What is non-negotiable for us in the organization as colleagues, and we put in something that we desire. So we put in a list of desirables, not just things that we don't want. And I mean, of course, it's in the living of it that I will find out how honest I am going to be to that list. But I think that, to my mind, and even for my colleagues, I speak for them right now, I think it's the charter which we have revised together, which we hold much more sacred to our beliefs and how we hope to behave than the law. Because the law can be diddled all the time. So I mean, that's the take.
Not really. I mean, thank you everybody. We enjoyed that session. And we hope to keep talking about this individually and write to each other and share our various problems and reach out to each other, be groups and mentors and friends and community. Thank you.
Thank you. As a gesture of thanks, I would request my colleague to give